Chapter 997. With this escape route, it's not impossible for me to attain primordial chaos Tao fruit, even though I'm just a clone. Perhaps my main body will need some of my comprehension in the future to step into that supreme realm. Luo Fan couldn't stop smiling as such thoughts flashed through his mind. With that thought in mind, Luo Fan took a step forward and entered the law realm. At this moment, the way he looked at the law realm was completely different from before. Previously, he had only treated the law realm as a place to verify his comprehension of the profundities of laws. Now, however, he treated the law realm as a path of retreat. Firstly, the law realm was an existence that he could abandon at any time and wouldn't have much of a place in his heart. Secondly, the law realm was extremely important to him. Its status had almost risen to the point where it concerned his life. Looking at the law realm with a different mindset would naturally result in different feelings. In the past, the law realm had seemed so perfect that he couldn't find any areas that could be improved upon. However, in his opinion, the law realm was so crude that it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was riddled with holes. I have to change. In an instant, Luo Fan made up his mind. After making up his mind, the long river of the Great Path manifested above his head with a thought. Although the long river of the Great Path was a product of his comprehension of the mysteries of the Great Path, it was still a long river of the Great Path after all. If one's cultivation realm hadn't reached a certain level, they definitely wouldn't be able to see this long river. Therefore, even though Luo Fan's Great Path river appeared in the void above the entire law realm, it was as if it had enveloped the entire law realm within it. However, in reality, the number of living beings in the entire law realm who could see this long river of the Great Path could be counted on one hand. These living beings who saw the long river of the Great Path in the sky instantly fell into an indescribable epiphany. This epiphany even overshadowed the indescribable epiphany they had when they saw the changing sun. Through this epiphany, the mysteries of the entire law realm seemed to be revealed to them without any concealment. Almost everyone's cultivation realm kept increasing as they gained this epiphany. After Luo Fan placed the long river of the Great Path above his head, he sat cross-legged in the void. With a thought, the river of the Great Path began to vibrate slowly. Countless mysterious waves spread out from the long river of the Great Path and gradually seeped into the space, time, and even all matter and energy of the Great Path realm. These fluctuations contained the endless mysteries of the Great Tao River. As they seeped in, the space, time, matter, and energy of the entire law realm resonated with them and began to tremble. It was as if an artifact was being refined, and the entire world shook along with it. Bits of impurities started to be expelled from the law realm through the huge three-dimensional seal that enveloped the law realm. They entered the gap between Earth's universe and the primal chaos in the outside world, and were devoured and assimilated by the gray existence, disappearing without a trace. Due to these changes, the entire law realm was like steel that was being forged. It became more and more solid, purer, stronger, and more exquisite. The coarseness that Luo Fan found unbearable disappeared at a speed visible to the naked eye. The entire law realm followed Luo Fan's imagination. It was the most perfect and sturdy transformation of a world. This was the transformation of a perfect world. Luo Fan had already transcended. He had seen 3 perfect worlds, and he had also seen the projection of thousands of eras on the path of transcendence, which was equivalent to seeing thousands of perfect worlds. Under these circumstances, his understanding of a perfect world was extremely clear. He was extremely clear about what kind of exquisite structure a perfect world should have, and what kind of profound characteristics it should have, at least compared to what had appeared in Earth's universe before. Any cultivator at his level would be countless times clearer. Under such circumstances, he had to work hard to transform the vast thousand world into a perfect world. The only thing that restricted him was his cultivation realm. There was no restriction on his cognition at all. In other words, if Luo Fan's cultivation realm wasn't limited to the transcendent realm, he would have been able to transform this world into a perfect world like the Earth's universe. The limitation of this cultivation realm was not only a limitation of power, but also his perception, his understanding of heaven and earth. In other words, he now knew the various characteristics and structures that a perfect heaven and earth should have. However, due to the limitations of his cultivation level, he did not know how to make these characteristics take form. He did not know how to make the heaven and earth form such a structure. Even so, if he did his best, the benefits to the Great Thousand World would reach an unimaginable level. Although it was impossible to transform the Great Thousand World into a perfect world. However, it could greatly improve the quality of the vast thousand worlds, ultimately reaching a state that was incomparably close to a perfect world. At this moment, Luo Fan was completing such a transformation with the Great Tao River that he had comprehended above his head. The mysteries contained in his Great Tao River were all the mysteries of the Great Tao that he had comprehended in his life. Moreover, it was extremely complete and could form the mysteries of the Great Tao River before him. Although such mysteries of the Great Tao were insignificant compared to the true Great Tao, it possessed all the characteristics that the true Great Tao possessed because it was complete. For example, the Great Tao's control over heaven and earth. Shen Dao knew that this transformation process would be extremely long. With a slight thought, he adjusted the flow of time in this world to 36 million times that of the Earth's universe. Such a multiple of the flow of time was impossible to exist in the Earth's universe. That was because the flow of time in the Earth's universe was stable. If the flow of time in the Earth's universe was too great, it would cause great pressure between the two spacetimes. In the end, this pressure would break through the space-time barrier, causing the world and the Earth's universe to merge into one. This would cause the world to be destroyed. However, the situation was completely different where the Earth's universe was located. The Earth's current location was the gap between the Earth's universe and the primal chaos state. Due to the influence of the primal chaos state, the flow of time outside the Earth's universe was originally unstable and chaotic. Due to this chaotic flow of time, it made no difference to the outside world how fast the flow of time inside the Earth's universe was. Under such circumstances, as long as the Earth's universe could stabilize in this gap in the beginning, then, even if the flow of time was adjusted to be 1 trillion times that of the Earth's universe, there would not be any negative consequences. The reason Luo Fan had chosen to increase the flow of time to 36 million times was not because of the Earth's universe's endurance or any other reason. It was because this was already enough. In the blink of an eye, 6 billion years had passed in the Earth's universe. Compared to the Transcendence Tower, 6 billion years had passed in the blink of an eye. Compared to the Transcendence Tower, it was only a short 100 years. It was 1/100th of a year, that is, more than 3 days and less than 4 days. During this period of 6 billion years, apart from the first few years when Luo Fan's Great Path River appeared in front of the living beings who were qualified to view it, no living beings could see its existence during the rest of the time because the Great Path River and the Earth's Law Realm had gradually become one. Even the cultivators who were qualified to see it could not do so. After the constant changes of the Great Path River during these 6 billion years, the entire Earth's Law Realm had undergone earth-shattering changes compared to 6 billion years ago. The surface area of the entire Earth's interior. It was more than 10,000 times larger than before. Back then, the Earth's Law Realm was almost boundless. Any living being at the 7th stage of the immortal realm would need thousands of years to walk in a straight line from the beginning to the end. Now that it had grown 10,000 times larger, even a 7th-stage immortal realm living being would need tens of millions of years to walk to the end. If an 8th-stage immortal realm living being could reduce this time by 100 times, it would still take hundreds of thousands of years. If a 9th-stage immortal realm living being could see it 100 times, it would still take thousands of years. Such a vast world. It had almost reached the pinnacle of the major thousand worlds. He was only 2 steps away from the perfect heaven and earth. Luo Fan already had an absolutely clear understanding of these last 2 steps. First of all, he had added all the things that he knew, but could not complete due to the limitations of his cultivation realm. He had added the structure and characteristics of the perfect heaven and earth to it, instead of just barely getting close to it like it was now. Next, after all the structure and characteristics were exactly the same as the perfect heaven and earth, he would push the world into a state of chaos. He would let the terrible scenes in the state of chaos temper the world, and let the world accept the test of the state of chaos. After these 2 steps, if the world was already complete and existed, then it would truly be a perfect heaven and earth. Either of these 2 steps was not something that the current Luo Fan could do. Therefore, it could be said that the Earth's law realm had reached the pinnacle of what Luo Fan could do at the moment. The entire Earth's law realm had also undergone tremendous changes in the past 6 billion years. During this period, it had experienced dozens of cultivator wars that almost destroyed the cultivation civilization. All living beings in the Earth realm had been nearly wiped out 7 or 8 times. Fortunately, Luo Fans was in control of the great Tao of the Earth realm. Therefore, even though it was extremely dangerous each time, the Earth realm still managed to survive in the end. The entire Earth realm was many times more prosperous than before. Now, the strongest cultivators in the Earth realm had reached the 9th stage of the immortal realm. Moreover, it was not just one cultivator who had reached the 9th stage of the immortal realm. There were 18 cultivators who had reached the 9th stage of the immortal realm. There were even more cultivators who were below the 8th stage of the immortal realm. These 18 cultivators of the 9th stage of the immortal realm were not the cultivators who had comprehended the cultivation method through comprehending the figure Luo Fan had left at the center of the world. Instead, they were cultivators who had risen through dozens of catastrophes in the past hundreds of millions of years. Among them, every one of them had boundless battle experience. If they were brought out, each of them could even be compared to an exterminator. Of course, even though their strength was comparable to an exterminator, their cultivation realm could not surpass the 9th stage of the immortal realm due to their intrinsic nature. They could not truly become an exterminator. As for Luo Fan, he had made great progress in the past 6 billion years. During these 6 billion years, he had made great progress. Over the past 6 billion years, he had been constantly urging his Great Path River to transform the entire law realm. However, he hadn't given up on his cultivation either. Similarly, he was comprehending the mysteries of laws at every moment and circulating his chi and blood to cultivate at every moment. Now, his cultivation realm had surpassed the great perfection of the transcendent realm. Even though he had not become a Tao master, he had already reached the end of the transcendent realm, just like when his clone was in the Tao integration realm. He had already sensed the nearly unbreakable shackles of the realm. Back then, he had spent 100,000 years cultivating from the initial transcendent realm to the great perfection of the transcendent realm. Now, he had spent 6 billion years cultivating from the great perfection of the transcendent realm to the end of the transcendent realm. Such a difference would have driven an ordinary person crazy. Even a great perfection sage to be would have a huge change in mentality. But for Luo Fan, this was nothing at all. He had tried cultivating an extremely fast speed. For example, he had cultivated from 0 to the transcendent realm in a few years. However, he was not unfamiliar with an extremely slow cultivation speed. Back in the untainted land, his body would occasionally cultivate in seclusion for trillions of years. Compared to that, what was so unacceptable about making such progress in the past 6 billion years? Therefore, although Luo Fan had experienced such slow progress, his mentality did not change at all. He was still calm and happy. The Earth realm has already reached its limit. There won't be much change, even if I continue. There's no need to waste any more energy. Luo Fan's figure gradually appeared from nothingness. The long river, the Great Path, also gradually disappeared. Compared to 6 billion years ago, Luo Fan's figure had undergone an extremely subtle change. Clearly, this was due to the improvement of his cultivation realm. The profoundness he had comprehended naturally manifested from his figure. This caused his figure to undergo a subtle change. After he appeared, he glanced at the earth realm that had expanded by more than 10,000 times. Then, he raised his hand and pointed at the center of the earth realm. There, a figure was floating on a seemingly ordinary small mountain. At first glance, the space-time around the small mountain did not seem special. However, if one took a closer look, they would discover that the space-time within a radius of 10,000 miles had completely merged with the figure. There were endless complicated changes in the space-time. These changes made the space-time within a radius of 10,000 miles seem like a space-time maze to ordinary creatures and even cultivators. Once one stepped into it, one would either have to walk through the space-time maze with great wisdom and arrive at the foot of the mountain and see the figure from afar and comprehend the endless mysteries of laws. Either one would be completely lost in the space-time maze and eventually die due to the changes in space-time, or one would directly die from the exhaustion of one's lifespan. That figure was the figure that Luo Fan had left in the Earth realm. The space-time changes around the small mountain were not set by Luo Fan. Instead, as the Earth realm continued to transform, the mysteries contained in Luo Fan's figure were too profound and mysterious, so it naturally evolved and caused the space-time changes. Luo Fan was pointing at the figure floating on the small mountain. As he pointed, the figure naturally changed. Its figure, its demeanor, its clothes, its hair, and everything else underwent subtle changes. It became more like the current Luo Fan and not the Luo Fan from 6 billion years ago. The instant the figure transformed, thunder rumbled faintly in the sky of the entire Law realm. The land and oceans of the entire Law realm trembled slightly. The space-time maze around the small mountain instantly became several times more complicated. The opportunity has been left behind. Let's hope that the Earth realm can recover earlier after each catastrophe in the future. Luo Fan sighed. With a thought, he slowed down the flow of time in the Earth realm to the same speed as the Earth realm. Following that, he took a step forward and left the Earth realm. He stood on the 12,960-layer talisman outside the Earth realm. Luo Fan wanted to stop the great battles that would happen in the Earth realm from time to time, which would endanger the cultivation civilization. Of course, he could do so with just a thought. However, if he did that, the Earth realm's development would be hindered and the Earth realm would become more and more reliant on him. In the end, if he were to let go, the entire Earth realm would instantly descend into chaos, which would lead to an even more terrifying catastrophe for the cultivation civilization. How could such an Earth realm become his path of retreat? How could he cultivate here? How could he use this place as his foundation? It was for this reason that although Luo Fan detested the emergence of the cultivation civilization's catastrophe, he did not directly stop it. Instead, he made all sorts of preparations so that the Earth realm could catch its breath more easily after the cultivation civilization's catastrophe. This would allow the cultivation civilization to recover at a faster pace. As for eliminating the root cause of the cultivation civilization's catastrophe, that was out of the question. Any living being would naturally have selfish motives. When this kind of selfishness was accumulated over a long period of time and magnified by countless living beings, it would eventually lead to an earth-shattering battle that would cause the cultivation civilization's catastrophe. As long as the Earth realm was allowed to develop naturally, even Luo Fan would not be able to avoid the cultivation civilization's catastrophe. Luo Fan stood on the three-dimensional talisman and looked at the dusky scene in the gap between the Earth's universe and the primal chaos for a good while. He sighed, and with a thought, his figure instantly disappeared from this place. When he reappeared, he was already in the unseen world. Then he disappeared again. He had already left the unseen world and appeared in the void behind the boundless laws and laws. When he disappeared again, he had already returned to the boundless void of the Earth's universe. Chapter 998. This voice contained endless mysteries. Not only did it stimulate Luo Fan's hearing, but also stimulated his sight, touch, smell, taste, and even perception at the same time. In a trance, Luo Fan even felt like he had fallen into a world of sound waves. This was the scene that appeared when he was conversing with the great perfection quasi-saint from this universe. From this alone, he could tell that the speaker must be a great tier sage to be. Moreover, he was definitely not an ordinary great tier sage to be, but a powerful great tier sage to be who was close to the peak. Luo Fan was shocked. With a thought, he felt a tremendous and unparalleled aura suddenly wrap around him from all directions. Then, the entire void seemed to be frozen in an instant. In the blink of an eye, the stability of time and space in the surroundings had increased by an unknown number of trillions of times. Not to mention the Great Tianyuan world, it was many times stronger than the Great Tianyuan world. Even Luo Fan found this degree of stability of time and space troublesome. Although he could use all kinds of magic powers and methods to break it and move through the void, it would take him some time. For an existence of his level, this amount of time was enough for him to create a world. Luo Fan raised his eyes and looked into the distance. He saw a young man, a young girl, a middle-aged man, and an extremely old man. A total of 4 people were floating in the air. The 4 people were not on good terms and were quite far away from each other. They seemed to be wary of each other. At a glance, Luo Fan knew that the 4 people were great perfection quasi-saints. Moreover, they were at least equivalent to great perfection quasi-saints. The void, dozens of light years around them, had been set up with countless intricate arrays that firmly locked time and space. Luo Fan couldn't even sense the situation outside the array. He could only feel that the array was like a complete world. I don't know why fellow Taoists are stopping me here. After Luo Fan saw their cultivation realms, he was more or less relieved. After the past 6 billion years of cultivation, he had already reached the peak of the transcendent realm. He was only one step away from breaking through the transcendent realm and becoming a Tao master. Under such circumstances, these 4 people were equivalent to great perfection quasi-sages who had transcended great perfection. Although the surroundings were already controlled by the countless formations they had set up, it was not a big threat to him. If he wanted to defeat them, it would only take him a little more effort. In such a situation where his life was not in danger at all, naturally, he did not need to worry too much. That was why he was interested in chatting with them. Otherwise, once he sensed that his opponent had the ability to threaten his life, he would immediately attack. He would only stop and speak after erasing that threat. At this moment, the expressions on the faces of the 4 people were not good, especially that old man. At this moment, his expression was also extremely ugly. 100 years ago, you definitely did not have the cultivation you have now. How could you grow to such a level in just 100 years? The old man said with an extremely ugly expression. His voice was still hoarse and had an indescribable aura of decay. When that sound was transmitted over, the surrounding void faintly fluctuated, but there were no changes. Luo Fan only felt that this sound was slightly stimulating beyond his sense of hearing, but it was not as obvious as the sound he had heard before or the sound he had heard 100 years ago, where the sound waves transformed into the world. Obviously, the change in the stability of the surrounding time and space made it difficult for the voice of a great perfection quasi-sage to reveal the profoundness contained in it. This old man was none other than the great perfection quasi-sage who had scolded Luo Fan when he was collecting materials within a radius of 1 billion light years 100 years ago. Later, his attitude changed instantly. According to what fellow Taoist Longan said, you really shouldn't be so powerful. The voice that Luo Fan had heard when he had just returned to the Earth universe rang again. This time, Luo Fan was able to see who the person who spoke was. It was the middle-aged man among the 4 people. This is just a small matter. Compared to this, I'm more interested in knowing why fellow Taoists set up a formation here to trap me. Luo Fan did not answer their question. Instead, he said indifferently. The expression on his face didn't change much as he looked at them with an extremely cold expression. His aura did not show any signs of being released, But there was a natural, awe-inspiring might that caused the expressions of the four people present to change slightly. Don't talk nonsense. Even I won't reveal that kind of secret. Let's work together to subdue him first and then interrogate him. The great perfection quasi-sage said indifferently at this moment. Her voice sounded very pleasant at first glance, and it had a kind of intoxicating charm to it. However, if one listened carefully, they would be able to hear the indescribable aura of decay in her voice. It was as if it came from the depths of the 9 underworlds. It was eerie and terrifying, causing people to involuntarily get goosebumps. I agree, the young man who had not spoken said coldly. There was also an indescribable sense of decay in his voice. I understand now. So you guys wanted to force me to tell you where I went because you couldn't find me all these years? Luo Fan suddenly thought of something when he heard their words. You really went to a special place. At this moment, the extremely old man's eyes lit up, and his voice suddenly rose. So that's how it is. Ha ha ha. So you guys are already afraid. You no longer have any confidence in surviving this age of chaos. Ha ha ha. Luo Fan could not help but burst into laughter. From the way he laughed, it was as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. We are indeed afraid, the middle-aged man said indifferently. His expression was as if he was talking about the unquestionable common sense of water flowing downwards. As a great perfection quasi-sage, as a cultivator who had lived from the sage era to the end of days, he was a cultivator who lived from the sage era to the current end of days. The Tao heart of a great perfection quasi-sage was naturally at the great perfection. Admitting the fear in one's heart was a psychological barrier that was difficult for mortals to overcome. But for existences like them, it was something that almost everyone could do. But it wasn't something to be surprised about. Ha-ha! Luo Fan was not surprised by this and just laughed. Let's begin. The middle-aged man sighed and pointed a finger at the void. The void within a radius of several dozen light years instantly changed. A boundless land formed beneath Luo Fan's feet, spreading out in an instant until it covered an area of tens of light years in the void. Above his head, a blue sky screen appeared. The starry sky that could originally be seen was now filled with stars. It was completely covered by the canopy of the sky. In an instant, the world in front of him changed drastically. It was as if he had been transported to another world in the blink of an eye. Of course, it only looked like it. Luo Fan was very clear. He was still standing at the same spot without moving. The changes in front of him were just changes in the array. It was just a change in the formation. He did not enter any world. With such a change, an indescribable pressure suddenly appeared out of nowhere and acted on Luo Fan. This pressure was as if the great Tao in the unseen world was suddenly very dissatisfied with him. It was even unwilling for him to exist in this world and wanted to wipe him out of the boundless space and time. To actually produce such a change, the Tao of Array is probably close to the peak. Luo Fan stopped laughing and looked up at the void. He realized that the change in the array was not just a change in the environment. Instead, it was like the real Earth and the universe producing countless laws and laws. Under these laws and laws, there was a layer of nothingness. Behind this layer of nothingness, there was an unseen world. However, what existed in the unseen world was not the great Tao, but 4 figures. They were the 4 great perfection quasi-sages. When he looked up at where the 4 great perfection quasi-sages were, he realized that the figures there were swaying slightly and then gradually dissipating as if they had never been there. Clearly, the 4 greater perfection quasi-saints had used various strange methods to enter the formation of the world when the changes occurred. Good move. Using oneself as the great Tao and the array as the world, condensing boundless power to crush the opponent. If I was still the old me, I might really be trapped and at their mercy. Luo Fan could not help but exclaim in admiration. Unfortunately, I'm not the old me. I'm countless times stronger than before. Then, with a shake of his body, an indescribably powerful aura suddenly emanated from his body, covering everything within a radius of dozens of light years. Along with his aura The pressure, repulsion, and suppression that had been placed on his body were instantly expelled. They could only linger around his body for tens of thousands of miles, but could not get within 10,000 miles of his body. I'm not a great perfection quasi-sage. I'm a transcendent being. Even if it is the real great Tao of the Earth universe, I can still find a way to avoid its effect on me. Not to mention, this is just a great Tao simulated by the array. Such a thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. He lifted his foot and took a light step forward. His figure instantly crossed the barrier of the laws, crossed the layer of nothingness, and entered the unseen world, arriving in front of the four great perfection quasi-sages. How is this possible? The four great perfection quasi-sages were originally planning to use the strongest means of the array to subdue Luo Fan. All of a sudden, Luo Fan's body shook and his aura erupted, completely eliminating the real pressure on him and preventing them from grasping Luo Fan's aura. Then, Luo Fan took a light step forward and appeared in front of them in a way that was far beyond their imagination. He looked at them with a gaze that made them extremely uncomfortable. Such a change had truly far exceeded the scope of their understanding, and it caused them to simply not dare believe their eyes for a time. They wondered if they'd suffered chi deviation in their cultivation and were hallucinating. However, Luo Fan quickly dispelled their doubts. Luo Fan smiled and said, "Now it's my turn." With that, he raised his hand and grabbed at the void in front of the four of them. In an instant, the four of them felt their bodies being suppressed by an unimaginable force. Crackling sounds rang out from within their bodies. Their bones, their muscles, their strength, their everything seemed to be collapsing and being destroyed under this pressure. Oh no, his cultivation realm is much higher than ours. We can't fight him with ordinary means. Let's fight with our lives. The middle-aged man roared. At this critical moment, the decaying aura in his voice actually dissipated a lot, and a subtle vitality was generated in his voice. The decaying aura on their bodies was because they could only watch as death approach them for billions of years. They couldn't find any hope or any goal to fight for. It was because they couldn't find any possibility of survival. Such a decaying aura. It only appeared because of their own mentality. At this very moment, their lives were in danger. If they weren't careful, they would be doomed eternally, never to reincarnate. At this most dangerous moment, it was the moment when their desire to live exploded. The explosion of their desire to live. It would naturally dispel the decaying aura because they couldn't see any hope. That was the reason why such a situation had occurred. Following his words, the faces of the other three people also showed resolute expressions. They all roared. In an instant, the entire formation shook violently, and the barrier between this place and the outside world, which was the layer of nothingness, was instantly broken. As the layer of nothingness was broken, in an instant, an infinite amount of laws, an infinite amount of energy, an infinite amount of matter, an infinite amount of time, and an infinite amount of space all surged towards this place. This was not an ordinary space-time. This place was space, but it wasn't. There was time, but there wasn't time. It was an extremely mysterious place that couldn't be described with words. Normally, only the great Tao existed here, as well as the infinite space-time that was attached to the great Tao that hid the endless mysteries of the world. This kind of existence was completely different from the ordinary space-time. Therefore, when it was completely opened before the ordinary space-time, everything in the ordinary space-time would surge towards this place at an unbelievable speed. This kind of surge was like the entire world condensing in one place and suddenly crashing into this place. Under such circumstances, everything that existed in the unseen world seemed to be struck by the most terrifying and tyrannical method in an instant. If it was an ordinary cultivator, they wouldn't have any hope of survival. Even a great perfection quasi-sage like Taoist Long and would definitely lose 80 to 90% of his life, even if he didn't die from such an impact. Even if the great perfection quasi-sage was created by the formation that they had set up, the outcome wouldn't change much. If even they themselves were in such a state, one could imagine how terrifying the impact that an outsider like Luo Fan, the existence that they had to deal with, would be. When Luo Fan sensed this change, he couldn't help but be shocked. This method can actually be used to attack. With a slight thought, his body shook, and he directly broke through the unseen restrictions, arriving at the place that would be the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos in the Earth's universe. However, this place wasn't the unseen world of the Earth's universe, but the unseen world of the formation. Although this huge formation was terrifying and had endless power, it was attached to the Earth's universe. Therefore, when he broke through the unseen world and entered a deeper place, the place he entered was not the gap between the Earth's universe and the state of chaos, but the Earth's universe. It was the void where Luo Fan had first returned to the Earth's universe. When Luo Fan appeared in this void, a cracking sound rang out in front of Luo Fan. Then, as the void distorted, a scene of doomsday appeared in front of him within a range of dozens of light years. This scene was the scene of the formation world being destroyed. The entire formation world was presented in detail, and the entire process of destruction was not missed out at all. Moreover, Luo Fan even saw what was happening in the unseen world of the formation world through the scene of destruction. He saw the four great perfection quasi-sages struggling frantically in the powerful impact, trying their best to reduce the impact on their bodies as much as possible. The light and shadow scenes that appeared in front of Luo Fan were constantly shaking, constantly twisting, and gradually becoming transparent. Vaguely, Luo Fan could see the existence of all kinds of unique items in the huge light shadow that covered a range of dozens of light years. These should be the treasures used to set up this formation. Luo Fan carefully distinguished those artifacts, and could faintly sense that the distribution of those artifacts contained some kind of extremely profound theory of array Tao. He could not help but think to himself, the four great perfection quasi-sages struggled with all their might, and in the process, they displayed their powerful abilities as great perfection quasi-sages. In the end, when each of them was destroyed to the point where only their heads were left, a gap was finally opened in the formation space. Four heads emerged from the gap and appeared in the void of the Earth's universe. Chapter 999. The entire process of Taoist Tong Sheng's resistance and destruction was witnessed by Taoist Zhen Tian and the other two. There was a hint of fear in their eyes. Taoist Tong Sheng was about as strong as them. But in those few breaths of time, Taoist Tong Sheng's body and soul were destroyed, and his remaining power was about to give birth to a new life. How could they not be terrified by this? Luo Fan hovered in the void as he stared at the star-like cocoon of light. He didn't even bother to look at Taoist Jintian and the other two, as if they didn't exist at all. The light cocoon pulsated like a heart, and it only started to change after half a day. The cocoon of light suddenly expanded by several times before shrinking at an unimaginable speed. In the blink of an eye, it had shrunk from several times the size of a star to 100 feet. Then, a clap of thunder sounded. A giant tore open the cocoon of light and appeared in the void of Earth's universe. The light cocoons that had been torn apart turned into countless specks of light that gathered around the giant. They were like ribbons that rippled slightly, looking quite mysterious. This giant had the appearance of a burly man. He had a well-built body, and his expression was not lifeless. Instead, it was extremely lively. Furthermore, his eyes were extremely clear, as if he was a newborn baby. Anyone who looked at him would involuntarily feel as if his soul was being cleansed. "I'm going to kill you," the giant said to Luo Fan after it appeared. The voice was like a clap of thunder, shaking the void within a radius of several light years. It caused the void within a radius of several light years to tremble incessantly, as if it would collapse at any moment. When Luo Fan heard the giant's words, he knew that the giant must have obtained Taoist Tong Sheng's memories. Even though he was no longer Taoist Tong Sheng, but a completely new life form of power, he was still formed from Taoist Tong Sheng's power. Even though the brand within the power had been completely wiped away, the memories and information contained within were still present. Of course, it wouldn't disappear completely. These memories were naturally his memories to a creature of power that was like a blank piece of paper. Luo Fan was the murderer of Taoist Tong Sheng. This was definitely recorded in the memories. As such, it was very obvious that this creature of power regarded Luo Fan as an enemy, which was incomparably natural. After the power giant finished speaking, his body trembled, and he grabbed at Luo Fan with both hands. This grab, faintly, it seemed as if the invisible Great Tao was carrying all the power of the entire Earth and universe and pouncing towards Luo Fan. While the power of this grab could not be compared to Taoist Tong Sheng's attack, it was pure, and its power could not be underestimated. Luo Fan's expression didn't change in the face of Taoist Tong Sheng's attack. He could kill him with a single thought. Naturally, he wouldn't change in the face of this creature of power. With a slight thought, the 72-layer three-dimensional talisman floating in front of him enlarged again. Just like before, it grabbed at the giant. As if it had transcended time and space, it directly arrived around the giant. Then it abruptly constricted and grabbed the giant in its palm. As for the giant's unfathomable grab, it was naturally of no use at all. Even the 72-layer three-dimensional talisman couldn't damage it at all. All of its power was reflected back, causing his body to completely lose the ability to resist. Those aren't your memories, Luo Fan said calmly. With that, he willed the three-dimensional talisman to seep into the giant's body. After a while, all of the giant's memories were separated from him. Like a book, they appeared in the giant's memories. With such a change, if the giant wanted to know everything in that memory, it could flip through those memories like flipping through a book. However, his own emotions and mentality wouldn't change at all. However, these memories would not change him at all. He was still a living being that was like a baby, and his memories were still like a blank piece of paper. After Luo Fan did all of this, the giant's eyes became clearer and brighter. There was a hint of confusion in his expression. His desire to attack had naturally disappeared. Seeing this, Luo Fan nodded. He raised his hand and squeezed, causing the giant's body to emit cracking sounds. It sounded like bones were constantly being knocked against each other. In the blink of an eye, the giant had shrunk to the height of a normal person. From the looks of it, he was a 3-meter-tall, simple, and honest man. From now on, you will protect my shadow in the law realm, Luo Fan said to the man. The man's body trembled. He chuckled and said, "All right." Luo Fan nodded and casually waved his hand in the void. The burly man's figure instantly broke through the barrier of countless rules and laws, passed through the invisible layer of nothingness, and directly rushed into the gap between the Earth's universe and the state of chaos. He passed through the 12,960 layers of three-dimensional talisman outside the law realm and entered the law realm, landing next to Luo Fan's image. Luo Fan didn't feel worried about the man. Although this burly man was extremely hostile toward him when he was just born and even planned to kill him with his life, that was only because he had received the body's memories and not because he really had much hatred towards him. Now, he had completely eliminated the influence of all his memories. This big man had naturally become a blank piece of paper, and he had a clearer understanding of the facts. He knew that Luo Fan was his creator, and that he was born because of Luo Fan. Under such circumstances, he would naturally feel gratitude towards Luo Fan, as well as admiration. Of course, this kind of thinking wasn't reliable. The Law Realm was Luo Fan's path of retreat. It was an important world that he was willing to spend 6 billion years to perfect. If that was all, Luo Fan obviously wouldn't let him enter the Law Realm. There was another reason why Luo Fan could put him in the Law Realm without worry. It was because of the 72-layer three-dimensional talisman. The three-dimensional talisman was extremely powerful. At this moment, it had completely fused with the man's life force. As long as Luo Fan willed it, he would be able to kill the man, destroy his soul, and destroy his body and soul. In this way, it was naturally foolproof. Watching the disappearance of the giant, the eyes of Taoist Hung Tian and the other two lit up. They looked at Luo Fan with amazement and admiration. They were great perfection quasi-saints born and raised on earth. He was not a transcendent. To them, extending their perception deep into the unseen world and seeing the legendary Great Tao was already their limit. But at this moment, Luo Fan easily made a living being that could barely be regarded as a great perfection quasi-sage break through the unseen world and enter a place that they could not sense or detect. What did this mean? This meant that their original idea was correct. This great perfection sage to be. The region he mentioned 100 years ago was indeed able to avoid the annihilation of the Age of Chaos. All of a sudden, without hesitation, they each grabbed the 36-layered three-dimensional talisman that Luo Fan had given to them. An indescribable aura was emitted from the three-dimensional talisman the moment he grabbed it. This aura was extremely strange. It was different from anything they had sensed in their 10 billion years of life. This was an aura that transcended heaven and earth, transcended the universe, transcended time, and transcended space. In the face of this aura, they felt an indescribable oppression. This oppression, it was as if the owner of this aura only needed to slightly tremble to crush each and every one of them into the finest powder from the inside out. This is the aura. This is what we're looking for. Only this can allow us to transcend the annihilation of the times. Only this can allow us to survive the cycle of the times. Only this can allow us to have endless time to seek the great Tao and verify the origin of chaos. In an instant, such thoughts flashed through the minds of the three of them. They felt an indescribable excitement. Every single one of them was so excited that they couldn't control themselves. When their excitement subsided, they all felt pity. What a pity for Taoist Tong Sheng. If he hadn't been so anxious, he would have sensed the restriction and discovered its profundities. He wouldn't have treated it as an evil deed. They thought to themselves. The three of them did not stop because of this pity. With a thought, they each swallowed the 36-layered three-dimensional talisman into their own life force. The 36 layers of the three-dimensional talisman contained infinite power and contained infinite unimaginable miraculous effects. As soon as it entered their life force, it was like a drop of ink falling into a river. It first dyed the water, then rippled. He had already disappeared without a trace, as if he did not exist at all. This strange change made the three of them feel an indescribable chill emanating from the origin of life, causing them to shiver. In a trance, they felt an indescribable shadow looming over their heads. It made it difficult for them to breathe. All of a sudden, they felt a faint sense of regret. Their confidence that they would be able to achieve the Tao and transcend as long as they had endless time was greatly reduced. Of course, it was only reduced, but it did not disappear. As supreme beings who could cultivate to the great circle of sage-to-be, and as terrifying beings who could survive for 3 eras, their confidence was unshakable. Of course, they believed that they wouldn't be unable to break through even if they had endless time. Even if it was a restriction in their life force, they believed that it would not be flawless. They would definitely be able to break through it after a long time. Luo Fan did not care about their feelings. He said to them, "I have a world that almost transcends the universe. You can forever avoid the harm of the rotation of time there and have eternal time. However, that world is very important to me. If you want to enter it, your power will be limited to a level weaker than the highest power in that world. If you don't want your power to be limited, you can only stay outside of that world and not enter it." The three of them looked at each other and made up their minds. They wanted to avoid the harm of the rotation of time on Earth, not just to survive, but to have more time to cultivate and have a brighter future. How could they be willing to enter that world with their power limited? Therefore, they did not even have to ask about the level of the highest power in that world and how limited they would be if they entered. They directly refused to enter that world and said to Luo Fan in unison, "I only want to stay outside of that world and cultivate. Please grant my wish, my lord." Because they were already restricted and their lives were in Luo Fan's hands, they naturally did not dare to address Luo Fan as fellow Taoist. They did not even dare to call him brother. However, none of them were willing to call him master. Therefore, they could only reluctantly accept the title of my lord. Luo Fan looked at them and smiled. He did not try to persuade them and only said, "It's up to you. If you want to enter that world, you only need to pray in your hearts, and you will naturally be able to enter." That world is developing very quickly now. There are already cultivators at the peak of the Khanate Grand Luo realm. His cultivation will be limited to the mastery of the Khanate Grand Heavenly realm. In the untainted land, Luo Fan divided the primordial golden Luo into 3 realms, namely, the Lu Celestial, the Real Celestial, and the Golden Celestial of the Great All-Embracing Heaven. Ordinary practitioners were the disbanded Celestial of the Great All-Embracing Heaven, the True Celestial of the Great All-Embracing Heaven, and the Golden Celestial of the Great All-Embracing Heaven. Luo Fan's Tao fruit was the loose path of the Great All-Embracing Heaven, and the true path of the Great All-Embracing Heaven. Daluo Jin said, "It was different in Earth's cosmos. In Earth's cosmos, Khanate Grand Heavenly Gods were divided into 4 levels, and they were beginner, lesser, mastery, and peak. The expressions of the 3 people did not change. They only thanked Luo Fan and did not say anything else. Seeing this, Luo Fan didn't waste any time. With a thought, he sent out a wave of energy. Carrying the 3 of them, it directly penetrated the barrier of the boundless laws and entered the layer of nothingness that was covered by the boundless laws and regulations. Then, it pierced through the formless void and entered the unseen world. Taoist Dantian and the other 2 were dazzled by the whole process. They were great perfection quasi-sages of the Earth cosmos, so they were able to sense this. But it was impossible to reach. At most, they could only wander to this place. The fact that Luo Fan allowed their true bodies to pass through the layers of obstacles and arrive here so easily was simply the means of a sage. It made them feel an unimaginable shock, and they felt an inexplicable reverence for Luo Fan. Luo Fan naturally did not care about how shocked and reverent they were. After arriving at the unseen world, it suddenly shook and brought them through the unseen world. They entered a boundless, dusky place that seemed to be in a state of chaos. There was only a pitch-black ball that existed at the edge of this dusky place that seemed to be in a state of chaos. The moment they entered this place, Taoist Dantian and the other 2 felt an unimaginable pressure pressing down on them. It made them feel as if they were being pressured by an unbearable pressure from the inside out and from top to bottom. This pressure was close to the limit of what they could bear. It made them feel as if they could be crushed into powder from the inside out with just one more feather. Their souls would scatter and their existence would be completely erased. Could this be the chaos? Such a thought appeared in the minds of the 3 of them. Inexplicable fear and excitement made it impossible for their Taoist hearts to remain calm. The way they looked at Luo Fan had completely changed in an instant. A feeling of looking up to a great mountain filled their minds. They could not even have any thoughts of fighting against Luo Fan. As for daring to challenge Luo Fan before, he regretted it so much that his intestines turned green. Is our Lord a sage? Otherwise, how could she create a world in the chaos? For any cultivator with a little bit of knowledge, the chaos was a forbidden area for cultivators. Unless one had become a sage, stepping into the chaos would be courting death. Based on this, the existence that could create a world in the chaos could only be a sage. Based on all these, wasn't their Lord in front of them a saint? Such a deduction was so natural and clear that the 3 of them had no choice but to believe it. Their mentality changed completely in an instant. They even vaguely felt an inexplicable sense of pride. It was the pride of being controlled by a sage and being restricted by a sage. If Luo Fan did not have the protection of the 12,960 layers of 3-dimensional talismans, he would also feel rather uncomfortable. Although he would not be like other great perfection quasi-sages who could not withstand the pressure and would be crushed into powder, he would definitely not feel relaxed. Therefore, as soon as he entered the gap between the Earth's universe and the chaos, he quickly passed through the layers of barriers and appeared on the 3-dimensional talisman. He was directly in the protective circle of the 3-dimensional talisman, completely eliminating the strange existence that seemed to be in a state of chaos around him. It would not affect him at all. Taoist Jun Tian and the other two naturally appeared on the surface of the three-dimensional talisman at the same time. After all, the three of them were at their limits. The pressure that seemed to be able to destroy their bodies and souls with just a single feather instantly disappeared, allowing the three of them to feel extremely relaxed. May I ask, our Lord, is this the chaos? Taoist Jun Tian had guessed earlier. Just as he felt relaxed, he bowed to Luo Fan and asked. Hearing this, Luo Fan came to a sudden realization. He understood why their gazes and attitudes were so direct and obvious at this moment. He could not help but find it funny. Chapter 1000. The three were almost certain that Luo Fan was a supreme saint, but for some reason, he pretended to be a great perfection quasi-saint to make things difficult for them. As a saint, it was a piece of cake for him to make them think he was a great perfection quasi-saint. Now that Luo Fan directly denied that they were in the primal chaos, they couldn't help but look at each other in confusion. This isn't the primal chaos? How is that possible? Other than the primal chaos, where else would have such characteristics? Taoist Jun Tian exclaimed. Luo Fan smiled and didn't say much. You guys can cultivate here. Below is the law realm. If you want to step into it, just pray in your heart. He had already given them his answer. Whether they believed it or not was up to them. He didn't have the obligation to give them a standard answer that could convince them. After he finished speaking, with a single thought, his figure disappeared from the surface of the 12,960 three-dimensional talismans in a flash. Instead, he appeared directly in the law realm, where his image was left behind. Although Taoist Jun Tian and the other two had a restriction of 36 layers of three-dimensional talismans cast on them by Luo Fan, this restriction had completely merged with their life force. Other than being able to control the life and death of their life force, it had no other effect on them. Therefore, their cultivation and divine arts weren't affected by the existence of the 3D talisman. After seeing Luo Fan leave, they didn't split up to cultivate immediately. Instead, they gathered together to discuss. Is this really the gap between the universe and the primal chaos? Taoist Lin Xian asked with a frown. It should be. There's no reason for him to lie to us. Besides, if he wanted to lie, wouldn't it be better to admit what we said and raise his status? Taoist Jun Tian sighed. I also think it's true. Taoist Long and sighed. No matter what, we've finally escaped the annihilation of the era of reincarnation. We should have a long time to cultivate properly. Taoist Jun Tian let out a long sigh. Indeed, although I can't see the era reincarnation power clearly in the universe, I can faintly feel the universe rejecting me. He felt that there seemed to be some kind of malice in the void that was targeting him. Although there's a restriction here, I don't feel any rejection or malice. That person really didn't lie to us. Taoist Lin Xian said with a smile. At this moment, she was somewhat satisfied. As a woman, even though she was already a sage to be, she did not mind that her life was in the hands of others. Apart from sages, who in the world did not have their lives in the hands of others? Even cultivators who appeared to be extremely free were only ants in the eyes of more powerful cultivators, and they could be crushed into powder with a single wave of their hand. In such a situation, what was the difference between that and his life falling into someone else's hands? From this point of view, he could see whether or not it had been restricted by others. In other words, it was just a difference between the obvious and the not-so-obvious. She even had a slight disdain for Luo Fan. Don't think that you're controlling me from a high and mighty position. Maybe your whole life is under the control of the saints, and you just don't know it. Taoist Long and also nodded with a relaxed expression on his face. After discussing for a while, they all flew up and went to different parts of the huge three-dimensional talisman. This three-dimensional talisman had 12,960 layers. Its size was as huge as a star. It was as huge as a star. Existences like Taoist Jun Tian and the other two were as tiny as ants on Earth in the three-dimensional talisman. Thus, although it was the surface of the three-dimensional talisman, the space that they could make use of was rather huge. Even if they were interested, They could even create a few intelligent races on the surface of the three-dimensional talisman and enjoy the wonderful feeling of cultivating a civilization. The three of them went to different parts of the three-dimensional talisman. Although it was a three-dimensional talisman the size of a star, it was huge compared to their bodies. But in terms of their cultivation realm, this size was naturally nothing. Such a size was naturally not a big deal. With a slight thought, they could wrap the entire three-dimensional talisman. If it wasn't for the fact that this area was mysterious and had the aura of primordial chaos, their senses would not be able to extend out of the three-dimensional talisman. Perhaps they would be able to sense hundreds of millions of light years clearly. In Earth's universe, weren't they fighting against Luo Fan from hundreds of millions of light years away? After going to different parts of the three-dimensional talisman, the three of them used their own methods. Not long after, 3 cave dwellings of different styles that were equally mysterious and vast appeared on the surface of the three-dimensional talisman. These 3 cave dwellings naturally could not be compared to the cave dwellings on Earth's universe. With their abilities as great completion quasi-saints, they could naturally create their own worlds as cave dwellings, or even create their own worlds as cave dwellings. Here, even if the entire three-dimensional talisman was occupied by them, it would only be the size of the surface of a star. Now that they had to divide it equally among the 3 of them, how could it compare to a world? After creating the cave dwellings, the 3 of them did not slow down at all. Instead, they each used their own abilities to set up their most powerful defensive formations around the formation, firmly protecting their cave dwellings. Although part of these defensive formations were to guard against the changes in the external environment and the encroachment of the dusky existence on their cave dwellings, most of them were to guard against their companions and against each other. In this world, there were many methods that relied on the life, strength, and cultivation of similar cultivators to improve themselves. Even though the 3 of them had known each other for nearly 10 billion years, they were not completely sure that the other could resist this temptation. The reason why they could not be sure that the other could resist this temptation was because they themselves could not resist this temptation. If the others did not set up the defensive formations, they might not be able to resist the temptation and seize the opportunity to refine the others to aid their cultivation. As great completion quasi-saints, it was necessary for them to be self-sufficient. Therefore, although there was no essence chi here, it did not affect them at all. Therefore, although there was no essence chi here, it did not affect them in the slightest. After setting up the cave dwellings, the 3 of them did not waste any time. They directly entered the cave dwellings and began to circulate the power in their bodies to cultivate. Perhaps it was because the pressure of the era reincarnation was far away from them, allowing their minds to be clear, or perhaps it was because the environment here was suitable for them to cultivate, or perhaps it was because of the battle with Luo Fan that gave them some enlightenment. In short, after entering the state of cultivation, they actually all had some enlightenment, and their cultivation realm began to loosen for the first time in countless years. There were signs that it was going to rise. In the law realm, Luo Fan stood next to his own image. The burly man that he had thrown in earlier was currently guarding his image in a simple and honest manner. When he saw Luo Fan, he did not bow and only chuckled, appearing rather simple and honest. You have no cultivation at all now. The reason why you can compare to great completion quasi-saints is because the nature of the power you were born with is too high. This world is a law realm that I created. The cultivation system here is completely different from the outside universe. Now, split out a bit of your clone and send it into the cultivation world of this world. Go there and start cultivating from scratch, Luo Fan said to the burly man. As he said that, he raised his hand and rubbed it gently. The burly man's body trembled, and a bit of power drilled out from his back. It directly formed the shape of an infant in the void. After this infant appeared, it rushed out and turned into an invisible ray of light, heading towards one of the cultivation families in this law realm. At that moment, the sky was filled with red clouds. Many experts knew that a good cultivation talent would be born. For a time, the wind and clouds surged. Many experts began to move and began to gather at that location. A new wave of disturbance in the cultivation world arose. At this moment, the burly man was somewhat at a loss. Looking at the two completely different images reflected in his eyes, one could tell that he had split his mind into two. One part remained in this body, and the other followed the infant, which was his clone, to a cultivation family in this law realm. Your clone does not carry any power. It only contains a part of your consciousness. The body that your clone reincarnated into is a completely ordinary infant, apart from the cultivation talent you brought over from your consciousness. What you need to do next is to work hard to cultivate the cultivation system of this world. In the end, use your talent to improve the cultivation system of this world as much as possible, until you reach your limit. Luo Fan instructed the big man. This was his goal. Although this burly man was like a blank piece of paper, his essence was too high. Even if he couldn't be compared to Luo Fan, he was still a great accomplishment quasi-sage. At this level, he had never cultivated any cultivation methods, yet he was the best cultivation talent. Such a talented cultivator would definitely be able to quickly cultivate the cultivation system of this world to its peak. After that, it was highly likely that he would be able to create a cultivation method that conformed to the worldview. And this was the perfect reference for him to verify his worldview. When the large man heard Luo Fan's words, he simply smiled and nodded. Then he sat down cross-legged beside Luo Fan's image and closed his eyes. It was obvious that he had poured all of his will into his clone. That clone was an infant. Although he looked like a burly man, he had just been born after all. Therefore, he was not much different from an infant. Pouring his will into the infant and growing together with the infant brought out the best in each other. When Luo Fan saw this, he couldn't help but smile and nod. Then, he raised his head and looked at the sky. His eyes seemed to be able to see through the endless obstacles, and he saw the 3 cave abodes on the surface of the 3-dimensional talisman outside the world of laws. Let's see how long you guys can last. Although the surface won't be corroded, there's nothing inside. Even the great Tao doesn't exist. With your cultivation system that is completely built on the great Tao, if you guys can't comprehend the great Tao, let's see how you guys can improve. Do you really think that you can continue to improve by closing your eyes? Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. His original goal wasn't just the burly man that was formed from power. His target was more on Taoist Shintian and the other two. The 3 of them were standard cultivators from the Earth's universe. Such cultivators had no concept of worldview at all. Although their cultivation methods were different, the worldview they relied on was completely the mainstream worldview of the Earth's universe, which was the so-called Tao worldview. Under this worldview, cultivators cultivated to seek Tao and comprehend the great Tao. If such a cultivation system broke away from the great Tao, their cultivation speed would be unimaginably slow, and they might not even be able to improve at all. Although they seemed to feel that their cultivation realm seemed to be loosening and that they were about to make a rare improvement, they really thought that they could improve a lot. In reality, this was just because they were stimulated by their previous encounter and gained some new understanding of the great Tao that they had comprehended in the past. When they digested this understanding, they would either have to return to Earth or enter the law realm if they wanted to improve. They definitely couldn't stay on the surface of the 3-dimensional talisman. It was because of this understanding. Just now, Luo Fan was certain that they would definitely enter this world soon, even if their cultivation realms were restricted. As for why he wanted them to enter the law realm, the reason was simple. It was similar to why he wanted the burly man that was formed from power to enter the law realm. It was also to let them cultivate the cultivation method of the law realm so that they could use the worldview of the law realm to create a higher cultivation method. This would allow the cultivation civilization of the law realm to take another step forward and verify Luo Fan's worldview. As for whether they would obtain supreme achievements by cultivating their original cultivation method in the law realm, that was even more impossible. After Luo Fan had adjusted the law realm for 6 billion years, his worldview had long been engraved on the basic attributes of the law realm. Here, only by cultivating a cultivation method that matched the law realm's worldview would one be able to obtain greater achievements. Otherwise, Even if one cultivated a cultivation method passed down by a saint, it would be difficult and impossible to cultivate to connate Grand Luo. Therefore, as long as they stepped into the law realm, Luo Fan was confident that they would definitely change their cultivation method. They would definitely cultivate the cultivation system of the law realm and eventually push the cultivation system of the law realm to a higher level. A faint smile appeared on his face. Luo Fan didn't care about this inevitable outcome. With a thought, he took a step forward and his figure had already left the law realm and entered the unseen world. He broke through the unseen world and stepped into nothingness. He passed through the cover of the boundless laws and stepped into the void of Earth's universe. This time, no one came to make things difficult for Luo Fan anymore. His surroundings were empty and he could see the entire universe as far as his eyes could see. The strongest in this Earth's universe were not the 4 people who had fought against Luo Fan. Of course, the 4 people were not the only ones who were at the Great Perfection Quasi-Sages. According to what Luo Fan could sense, there were more than 10 Great Perfection Quasi-Sages in the entire Earth's universe. The strongest among them had also reached the peak of Great Perfection Quasi-Sage. Compared to Luo Fan, the only difference was that Luo Fan had his own independent worldview, while the other party did not. Almost all of these Great Perfection Quasi-Sages had witnessed everything that had transpired in this area. Of course, this was only a rough estimation. After all, they were all Great Perfection Quasi-Sages. They could vaguely sense their auras, but if they were to eavesdrop on their conversation, it would be a great offense and would be enough to cause enmity. Therefore, although these Great Perfection Quasi-Sages knew that Luo Fan had fought against 4 people and killed one of them, he had nurtured a creature of power in his corpse, subdued the other 3, and brought them somewhere unknown. They didn't know what method Luo Fan had used to subdue the other 3, nor did they know if Luo Fan had a way to avoid the cycle of time. Under such circumstances, they didn't care about what happened to Luo Fan. As long as Luo Fan didn't provoke them, they would pretend that they didn't know about Luo Fan's existence. They didn't even greet him. Unfortunately, they were too confident. Otherwise, the number of Great Perfection Quasi-Sages in this world would have increased. Luo Fan sighed to himself. Luo Fan was a little envious of these Great Perfection Quasi-Sages. However, he wasn't so envious that he would go and capture them one by one and bring them into the world. There was a reason why he said that these people were too confident. The Earth's universe seemed vast and boundless, spanning hundreds of millions of light years. However, for Great Perfection Quasi-Sages, anything that happened anywhere in the Earth's universe wouldn't escape their senses, unless it was a mysterious existence like the time vortex. Everything that happened to Luo Fan in the past 100 years was naturally not a mysterious existence like the time vortex. Therefore, they must have seen it. In other words, the information that these people received about Luo Fan was exactly the same as that of Daoish and Tian and the other 3. Under such circumstances, Daoish Zhen Tian attacked Luo Fan in an attempt to force Luo Fan to hand over his secrets. However, the other dozen people didn't seem to care about it all. The reason was that they didn't think that Luo Fan was stronger than them. They didn't think that Luo Fan could do what Daoish and Tian and the rest imagined with his cultivation realm that was similar to theirs. In other words, they didn't believe that Luo Fan could escape the reincarnation of time. Instead, they thought that Luo Fan had used some method that they didn't understand to avoid their detection. It was this confidence that made them look down on Luo Fan. At the same time, it allowed them to escape the fate of being restricted by Luo Fan. Feeling that it was a pity, Luo Fan moved his mind and took a step forward. His figure instantly traversed hundreds of millions of light years in the void and directly arrived outside a certain stellar system at the edge of Earth's universe. From the outside, this galaxy didn't look any different from an ordinary galaxy. However, Luo Fan knew that there was a huge secret in this galaxy. There was an existence that could transcend the time vortex. Chapter 1001. Outside this star system, the Era Bridge had completely disappeared. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find it, as if it was just an ordinary star system. With a slight thought, Luo Fan directly sat cross-legged in the void outside the star system. Through the mysterious spiritual connection, his mind was integrated with his doppelganger on the transcendent path. In an instant, he was the doppelganger, and the doppelganger was him. The two wills had merged into one in an instant. In an instant, endless information and comprehension poured into the mind of Luo Fan's doppelganger, and were integrated into its memory. The doppelganger and the original body were closely related. The doppelganger's comprehension could be transformed into the original body's comprehension, and the original body's comprehension could naturally be transformed into the doppelganger's comprehension. In an instant, Luo Fan's doppelganger, who had just stepped into the transcendent realm, continued to improve. In the blink of an eye, his cultivation realm had risen to the end of the transcendent realm, reaching the realm where he could break through the transcendent realm and become a real Tao master. With a slight thought, the power in his body changed. His body, his divine soul, his perception, and his will all changed. In a short while, he had reached the end of the transcendent realm. At this moment, the era vortex was in front of Luo Fan's doppelganger. The 5 levels that needed to be passed had been swallowed by the suddenly enlarged era vortex. If he wanted to continue to move forward, he could only step into the era vortex. Facing the era vortex, Luo Fan slightly frowned. A trace of hesitation flashed in his mind. It turned out that the reason why he had to pass the 9,999 levels was that the space-time around the era vortex was so distorted that he had to share the burden with the 9,999 planets. With the help of the connection between the 9,999 planets and the era vortex, the space-time around the era vortex was distorted. According to his original goal, it was not necessary for him to create 9,999 planets. As long as he was confident that he could withstand the terrifying space-time distortion around the time vortex, he could even crash into it. After carefully considering all these, Luo Fan gritted his teeth, and with a thought, he controlled his clone to directly step into the time vortex. At this moment, an indescribable barrier appeared out of nowhere between the doppelganger and the main body. In a trance, Luo Fan's main body felt as if his clone had completely disappeared. Similarly, the doppelganger had a feeling of complete freedom. However, this feeling only lasted for a moment. In that instant, the law realm between the Earth's universe and the state of primal chaos displayed an effect that Luo Fan could not have predicted. It had actually become a transit point. He reconnected Luo Fan's main body with his clone. So it's like this. This thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. At this moment, Luo Fan's clone had already entered an extremely strange place. Here, the time tide, which originally did not exist in the gap between the Earth's universe and the state of primal chaos, had actually formed a huge vortex. This made the place where he was at the center of the vortex, thus making the time tide in this place seem to not exist. At a glance, the bright red that shrouded everything seemed to have completely disappeared. This place seemed to be an absolute void. The 5 planets that should have existed but had been swallowed by the time vortex were nowhere to be seen. The surroundings were an absolute void that did not even have the time tide. This kind of void was different from the layer of nothingness below the law realm. It was a kind of void that was deeper and emptier than that. Compared to the void in front of him, the void under the law realm was like a pocket that had been stuffed with sand. In this void, Luo Fan seemed to be eternally motionless, but he also seemed to be moving forward at an unimaginable speed. No matter how he moved forward, how much he urged his power, and how much he accelerated, he found that he could not move even half a step forward. It was as if he was frozen in this void. To the clone, it felt like billions of years had passed. However, to the main body that sensed the state of the clone through the law realm, it felt like only a few breaths had passed. Luo Fan's body shook, and the light and shadow around him changed. In an instant, he appeared in a brand new world. This world was round, and it was boundless. There were 10 suns in the sky, and he was at the top of an immeasurably tall mountain. This mountain was billions of miles tall, and layers of clouds surrounded the foot of the mountain. Even the 9 suns seemed to be at the same level as the top of the mountain. He took a deep breath, and an indescribable comfort spread from his nostrils. In the end, it filled his entire mind and body. What filled his surroundings was not the energy of the universe, but innate energy that was unimaginably dense. There were even traces of chaotic energy mixed in, making the energy in the surroundings seem even more different. If that was all, Luo Fan would not feel so comfortable after taking a deep breath. In reality, there was an extremely strange intent mixed in with the energy. This intent contained an indescribable profundity. After this intent was mixed with the energy and absorbed into one's body, the intent would naturally produce an indescribable effect. It would begin to cleanse one's body, soul, and intent. Finally, it would leave one's body as the impure air was exhaled. Where is this? This is Chelan Cliff, where my dojo is located. At this moment, a calm voice rang out in Luo Fan's ears. The voice was clear and bright, and it faintly resonated with the intent that filled the surroundings. Clearly, it was the owner of that intent. When Luo Fan heard this voice, his heart tightened. He did not sense the existence of any practitioner at all. Even though the voice had reached his ears, he still could not find the source of the voice. It was as if the voice had simply appeared out of thin air, as if it had no owner. In such a situation, it meant that the cultivation level of the person who spoke was countless times higher than his. At this time, Luo Fan's cultivation had reached the end of the transcendent realm. The cultivation of a being who was much stronger than him was at least at the level of Tao Master. It could not even be an ordinary Tao Master. How could he not be nervous? He suddenly turned around and saw a young man in a sky-blue Taoist robe standing calmly 3 feet away from him, looking at him indifferently. The moment he saw him, Luo Fan had already confirmed that this person was definitely at the level of Tao Master. Because, even though he had already seen him, Luo Fan could not sense his aura, as if he did not exist at all. Luo Fan would not believe that the person who could isolate his perception with such a powerful means was not a Tao Master. What era is this? Why am I here? Luo Fan frowned and asked. This is not any era. Here, in your words, it is the universe that was not broken before the primordial era. The Taoist said indifferently. As he spoke, the Taoist had already walked to Luo Fan's side. He looked down at the boundless sea of clouds below. As for why you are here, don't you know? Were you the one who built that path? Did you bring me to the universe before the world was broken? Luo Fan frowned and asked. Although the person in front of him was at the level of Tao Master, Luo Fan did not have any fear towards him. Not only because he was only here as a doppelganger, but also because he knew that since the Taoist had brought him here, he definitely had something for him to do. He would not just deal with him because of his offense. I am Wu Daozi. My master is the ancestor of all demons. The Taoist did not answer Luo Fan's question, but introduced himself. May I know how to address you? After the introduction, he asked casually, Luo Fan. Luo Fan said indifferently. For cultivators, there is absolutely no need to hide their names. Therefore, Luo Fan had never given himself a fake name. Instead, he directly said his real name. So it is Luo Fan. May I know what area you are in? Wu Daozi asked. Luo Fan frowned and looked at Wu Daozi indifferently. He did not answer Wu Daozi's question. Wu Daozi smiled and did not care about Luo Fan's attitude. Seeing that Luo Fan was unwilling to answer, Wu Daozi did not pursue the matter. Instead, he said, Yes, that path was opened by me. Luo Fan frowned and was about to say something. However, Wu Daozi raised his hand to stop him and said, Do you know how many paths I have opened? Luo Fan was slightly taken aback and finally could not help but say, Isn't there only one? Although I do not think that I have mastered all the secrets of the universe, I would not have missed out on something like this. If there were other time vortexes, I would definitely have noticed it. Wu Daozi shook his head and said, I have set up a total of 160 million paths to guide future cultivators to the world before this world shattered. 160 million? Luo Fan was shocked. How is this possible? I definitely would not have missed out on so many time vortexes. Haha, it is not that you missed out on so many paths. It is that those paths do not lead to the era you are in. In other words, those paths do not lead to the future you are in for me, Daozi said faintly. Then, he raised his hand and pointed forward. In an instant, countless vortexes appeared densely in the sea of clouds below. These vortexes were all very small, and they slowly rotated in the sea of clouds. They were not fast or slow, and there was even a hint of calmness contained within them. How astonishing was Luo Fan's perception! With just a glance, he knew that the exact number of these countless whirlpools was exactly 160 million. Not one more, not one less. These are the time vortexes. Waves surged in Luo Fan's mind. Although his expression remained calm, his eyes were faintly flickering. Regarding the past, present, and future, Luo Fan's understanding was better than anyone else's. Combined with what Wu Daozi had said before, he instantly understood what Wu Daozi meant. He understood where the 160 million time vortexes led to. The relationship between the past, present, and future was relative. At a certain time, to the living beings of that time, it was the present. To the living beings of that time, it was the past. To the living beings of that time, it was the future. As I've said before, the past is eternal and unchanging. The present is what's happening right now. The future, it was constantly changing. There were countless of them. Therefore, from the perspective of the Dharma ending era, the first era after the Dharma ending era had countless eras. The first, or even countless eras before the Dharma ending era. They were all unique, eras that had already been determined. But, obviously, this was only a relative term. The eras before the Dharma ending era were the past compared to the Dharma ending era. But compared to the eras before that era, they were the future. In other words, the eras before the Dharma ending era were unique compared to the Dharma ending era. But compared to the eras before that era, there were countless eras. This concept could be compared to a tree with an infinite number of branches. Any point in time was a branch of this tree. From this point, there was only one direction to go to the roots. Only by going in one direction could one reach the roots. If one wanted to head towards the tail of the tree, which was the topmost leaf, there were countless directions to go. One could start from any of the branches that connected to this fork, except for the branches that were heading towards the roots of the tree. Wu Daozi's point of time was a branch of this tree, and the branch of Luo Fan's point of time was another branch of this tree after Wu Daozi's point of time. To go from Luo Fan's branch to Wu Daozi's branch, there was only one path. And from Wu Daozi, there might be countless forking points that were on the same level as Luo Fan's forking point. In other words, it could have countless possible futures. And Luo Fan's point of time was only one of these countless futures. Have you thought it through? Wu Daozi finally showed a smile. I have. This was originally a very simple question. I was too impatient before, so I didn't think of it. Luo Fan sighed. Before me, were there any cultivators who came here through this path? Luo Fan sighed and asked. No, you're the first. Wu Daozi also sighed. But it doesn't matter. With so many paths, there will always be more people who go through them. Why did you set up so many paths? It can't be to kill time, right? Luo Fan frowned and asked. No matter how he thought about it, he couldn't guess why Wu Daozi set up so many paths. What do you think a cultivator at the peak of the quasi-sage level wants? Wu Daozi smiled and turned his head to speak to Luo Fan. Luo Fan frowned and instantly understood his answer. A cultivator's cultivation sought to transcend, to live forever, and to be free and unfettered. Before reaching the peak of the quasi-sage level, perhaps there would be other things to distract the cultivator's attention, allowing the cultivator to have other goals to pursue. However, when a cultivator reached the peak of the quasi-sage level and reached the peak below the sage level, other than becoming a sage, what else could there be? You want to become a sage, Luo Fan said. But what does this have to do with so many paths? Are you planning to refine us? I don't think we have the ability to push you to become a sage. Your realm isn't high enough. Even if I explain it to you, you won't understand. Wu Daozi chuckled. Is that so? Luo Fan wasn't surprised. Then what are your plans for me? Cultivation. For cultivators, cultivation is the most important thing. Everything else is just miscellaneous matters. They are all paths that divert one's attention, said Wu Daozi. You mean that I should cultivate at Qilin's cliff and wait while I cultivate? Don't you know that this world is going to shatter soon? Luo Fan frowned. Your mission is to cultivate. Of course, if you don't want to, you can fight with me. If you can beat me, then everything is up to you, and you can do whatever you want. As for the shattering of the world, according to Master's calculations, there are about 6 billion years left. Even though the time isn't long, it isn't short either. It's enough for you to cultivate. Wu Daozi smiled. 6 billion years. The sage's divine sense is really incredible. Luo Fan could only sigh when he heard Wu Daozi's words. As for what Wu Daozi said about fighting with him, he didn't even think about it. Although he was at the end of the transcendent realm, he was only one realm away from becoming a Dao Master. However, compared to a real Dao Master, he was still not strong enough. Moreover, this person was equivalent to a peak Dao Master. If he were to fight, the other party didn't even need to do anything. Just his aura alone could destroy his body and soul. Under such a huge gap, it wasn't courage but stupidity to challenge him. Luo Fan was obviously not a stupid person. Naturally, he wouldn't challenge him. As for praising the sage's divine sense, needless to say, the sage was able to predict the shattering of the world 6 billion years before the shattering of the world. He could even predict the state after the shattering of the world, the development trend, and the final evolution. Such a divine sense was amazing. How could he not be emotional? The sage's divine sense is beyond our imagination. Even the reason why I am able to create these 160 million paths is because of Master's strength. Wu Daozi similarly sighed and said. Chapter 1002. Wu Daozi did not mind Luo Fan's words. He smiled and said, Peak quasi-sages and advanced quasi-sages are both quasi-sages. The difference between them is not that big. I wonder where do you plan to send me to cultivate? Luo Fan smiled. Wu Daozi said casually, You can choose any place in Qilin Cliff if you want. Then I won't stand on ceremony. Luo Fan nodded and went to the place he sensed before. It was the place with the densest yuan qi in Qilin Cliff. He took a step forward and arrived at this place. This Qilin Cliff was Wu Daozi's Dao field. There were no restrictions, but the entire Dao field was completely related to Wu Daozi. The place that Luo Fan chose could not escape Wu Daozi's senses. When Luo Fan arrived at that position, Wu Daozi couldn't help but reveal a helpless expression. I didn't think that the first person to pass the path would be a cultivator like this. I wonder how Master chose. Such a thought flashed through his mind. Wu Daozi was a peak quasi-sage. He was powerful, but compared to a sage, he was billions of miles away. Although the 160 million era vortexes and 160 million paths were said to belong to him, the one who had set up the paths, made them work, and selected the paths for the cultivators to pass through was his master, one of the 7 great sages of the Earth cosmos, the ancestor of all demons. Because of this, in Wu Daozi's opinion, Luo Fan was able to use this path to come here from a distant future. That was the result of his master's choice. Luo Fan himself might be special, but he did not care too much. Because of this mentality, Wu Daozi was generous to Luo Fan and did not care about his actions. This was because, to him, Luo Fan represented his master, the ancestor of all demons. In Wu Daozi's mind, a sage was omnipotent. Everything that Luo Fan did. Perhaps this was the result of the sage's calculations, and he had to support it. The location that Luo Fan had chosen did not have any buildings there. It was just an empty space. Looking at this empty space, Luo Fan had a thought. He raised his hand and pointed to the ground. In an instant, the ground swelled up. Countless sand and stones started to leave the ground as if they were grabbed by countless arms. They floated in front of him. These were floating and sinking. It floated in the void. Luo Fan's eyes flashed with a glimmer of light. In an instant, the floating sand shook violently. It had completely turned into even finer powder. After the fine powder was formed, it began to condense into countless three-dimensional talismans. After these countless three-dimensional talismans were formed, a second round of condensation began, followed by a third and a fourth round. At the ninth round, a 9-layered three-dimensional talisman was formed. And this 9-layered three-dimensional talisman wasn't like any other talisman. Instead, it looked like a luxurious palace. This luxurious palace was extremely detailed and majestic. Although it was only the size of a small thatched cottage, it naturally emitted a vast aura. After this palace-shaped three-dimensional talisman was formed, it began to produce an unimaginable attractive force. All the surrounding energy was attracted by this attractive force. As if it had met a black hole, it surged towards this palace-shaped three-dimensional talisman. The energy in Chelan Cliff was extremely dense. It was so dense that if it wasn't for the will and the void restricting it, it would have condensed into a solid state. This dense energy surged into the three-dimensional talisman. In an instant, it formed a huge whirlpool with a 9-layered three-dimensional talisman as the center. This whirlpool rotated at an extremely fast speed and expanded at an unimaginable speed. In a short while, it had already enveloped the entire Chelan Cliff. One must know that Chelan Cliff was only Wu Daozi's place of enlightenment. However, as a pinnacle quasi-sage, his place of enlightenment was almost a huge world. Its vastness could be calculated in billions of miles. Such a Chelan Cliff was actually shrouded by a huge whirlpool. The size of this whirlpool was terrifying, and the amount of yuan qi it was drawing could be imagined. Wu Daozi was the owner of Chelan Cliff. How could such a huge change escape his senses? The will that permeated the entire Chelan Cliff was, in fact, a product of his will after undergoing some mysterious transformation. The 9-layered three-dimensional talisman was like a real black hole. No matter how much energy surged over, it didn't mind swallowing it. This three-dimensional talisman was constructed by Luo Fan based on the laws of the world. Although its performance was similar to Luo Fan's initial cultivation of the Dao fruit path, its essence had already undergone an earth-shattering change. The will that filled the energy suppressed it and allowed it to produce all sorts of unimaginable effects. When it entered the three-dimensional talisman, it was directly suppressed by the three-dimensional talisman. It was completely different from Wu Daozi's own understanding of the world. It was like an ordinary cultivator entering the laws of the world. It felt extremely uncomfortable. This kind of discomfort made it impossible for the will to have the same effect as it did in the outside world. It was completely crushed by the countless lower three-dimensional talismans that formed the three-dimensional talisman. It turned into powder and was expelled from the three-dimensional talisman through some mysterious method. At this moment, Wu Daozi's expression suddenly changed. To be able to separate my will from my energy, a cultivator that master values is indeed not simple. Such a thought flashed through Wu Daozi's mind. Because the will had been completely shattered, even though Wu Daozi had complete control over the entire Chelan Cliff and knew everything inside the Chelan Cliff like the back of his hand, he was unable to invade the interior of the three-dimensional seal at all. The three-dimensional seal seemed to have no interior at all, no matter what method he used. No matter what method he used, he couldn't sense what was inside. Ever since Luo Fan appeared in the Chelan Cliff, this was the first time he felt like something was out of his control. However, even though he felt like his life depended on it, Wu Daozi didn't plan on doing anything. This was because he had greater confidence in his master, the demon ancestor. In his opinion, his master was a supreme saint. Even if the world was destroyed, he would not be harmed at all. How could he have predicted wrongly? Everything in front of him was definitely under his master's control. There was no way he could escape his master's grasp. Under such circumstances, he didn't need to care about what happened to Luo Fan. He just needed to follow his original plan and continue waiting. Wu Daozi calmed down and even sat down cross-legged next to the sea of clouds. His eyes were shining brightly. He looked at the 160 million whirlpools below him. Although these whirlpools were in the sea of clouds, they looked like they were naturally formed by the sea of clouds. However, in reality, every single one of those vortexes was connected to space, to time, and even to the great Tao in the dark. Their rotation, their distortion, and all of their changes contained endless, unfathomable profundities. If he could understand these mysteries, not only would Wu Daozi become a saint, but his strength would also increase. There wouldn't be a problem. At this moment, he was observing these whirlpools. He ignored everything in Chelan Cliff and focused on his own cultivation. Although Chelan Cliff was not Luo Fan's dojo, after using the 9-layer talisman to stir up all the Yuan Qi in Chelan Cliff, Luo Fan had already completely grasped all the changes in Chelan Cliff. He was even looking down at Wu Daozi. Wu Daozi did not hide the changes in his mind at all. Although there was no change in his expression, the light in his eyes completely revealed his thoughts. Luo Fan could see through the surge of Yuan Qi, but his psychological activities were completely revealed. Although this method of observation contained many incredible mysteries, it was essentially the same principle as bats. However, it was similar to how bats saw things. It was just that bats used sound waves while Luo Fan used Yuan Qi. Luo Fan could not help but heave a sigh of relief when he saw the changes in Wu Daozi's mind. He did not have any intention of stopping him. This meant that as long as he was a little more careful, he would be safe for a long time. Understanding this, he raised his hand and pointed at the 9-layered talisman in front of him. Instantly, the 3-dimensional talisman began to grow with the influx of Yuan Qi. In a short while, it had grown from the size of a small hut to the size of a real palace. When the vast aura connected with it, there was no longer any sense of awkwardness. Instead, it seemed very harmonious and natural. After the 3-dimensional talisman grew, it suddenly fell onto the ground. During this process, the speed of the Yuan Qi that poured in did not slow down at all. Instead, it sped up. With the influx of origin Qi, the 9-layered talisman gradually changed. Its originally somewhat illusory appearance gradually disappeared, and the characteristic of being able to tell at a glance that it was a 3-dimensional talisman completely disappeared without a trace. On the surface, it had completely turned into a real object. At first glance, it looked like a real palace. The entire process lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. After 3 days and 3 nights, the huge whirlpool that covered the entire Chelan Cliff suddenly trembled and then suddenly collapsed, turning into countless Yuan Qi droplets that exploded in all directions, creating a powerful shockwave that even caused the void in the sky to slightly distort. However, such a terrifying explosion did not cause any ripples in the sea of clouds below Chelan Cliff, nor did it affect the rotation of the 160 million vortexes. It was as if the explosion and the sea of clouds were in a completely different time and space, and everything that happened here would not affect the sea of clouds in the slightest. At the same time as the terrifying explosion occurred, the 9-layered talisman that Luo Fan had constructed with the sand of Chelan Cliff no longer had any traces of a 3-dimensional talisman. It looked like a magnificent palace that had experienced countless years and contained endless vicissitudes. The endless, vast aura that rushed out of the palace caused the Yuan Qi within a few hundred miles of the palace to collapse endlessly and turn into nothingness. There was no other intent that could get within a few hundred miles of the palace. In addition to the mysterious will, the endless Yuan Qi on the Chelan Cliff was condensed around the palace. Because there was no pressure from the will, the Yuan Qi was so dense that it solidified. It looked like the palace was sealed in a layer of ice. Luo Fan stood in front of the palace with a faint smile on his face. He turned his head and looked at the edge of Chelan Cliff. There, tens of thousands of miles away from the palace, Wu Daozi was still sitting quietly as if nothing had happened. He carefully stared at the many vortexes in the sea of clouds in front of him. Luo Fan shook his head and was about to step into the palace. Suddenly, Wu Daozi said indifferently, "Do you plan to always bring those ants with you?" Luo Fan was slightly taken aback. Then, he suddenly realized what Wu Daozi was talking about. He turned his head and said, "Can I?" I promised to bring them into the time vortex. I'm the one who put them in such a difficult situation. Why can't I bring them along? I said you could cultivate here. I never said I could let them cultivate here, Wu Daozi said indifferently. Luo Fan heard this. He knew that Wu Daozi had been so calm these past few days, as if he didn't care about anything. It was as if Qilin Cliff no longer belonged to him, and he could do whatever he wanted with it. It was simply the result of his own oppression. In reality, he had accumulated a lot of resentment in his heart. At this moment, he finally couldn't help but vent it. If that's the case, then forget it. After Luo Fan understood, he couldn't help but smile and said casually. After saying that, he raised his hand and pointed. The void trembled, and a bronze mirror appeared in the void. Then, the bronze mirror shattered. Because they couldn't catch up to Luo Fan on the path of transcendence, Wu Huang and the others appeared out of nowhere. They were cultivating in the world that Luo Fan opened up when they suddenly appeared here. They were a little confused and didn't know what was going on. Luo Fan saw them. With a slight thought, he knew their progress. At this moment, Wu Huang had a huge breakthrough compared to before. He was no longer at the innate Grand Luo, but didn't step into the perishing realm. He had reached the peak of the perishing realm and was only a small step away from the enlightening void realm. Apart from the martial monarch, the others had also improved to varying degrees. Even the weakest among them was at the peak of the innate Grand Luo. Some of them had even surpassed the innate Grand Luo and were similar to Wu Huang back then. Luo Fan didn't wait for them to react and said, "This place was before the world shattered. Take care, fellow Taoists." As he said that, he waved his hand. The void instantly changed, and Wu Huang and the others disappeared on the spot. They were sent out of Qilin Cliff by Luo Fan and fell into the boundless land below. Qilin Cliff was still between heaven and earth, but it wasn't in contact with the land. Instead, it was a huge island that floated in the void. Below the Qilin Cliff was a boundless land. Luo Fan might not have known this when he first stepped into Qilin Cliff. However, at this moment, after a few days of sensing, he was very clear about this. Moreover, Wu Daozi didn't stop him. So, it wasn't difficult for him to send Wu Huang and the others out of Qilin Cliff and into the boundless land below. After sending them away, Luo Fan didn't feel humiliated or anything like that. Although it seemed like he only sent Wu Daozi and the others away because he was forced by Wu Daozi, the truth was that he sent them away. But in fact, the reason why he sent them away was mostly because he wanted to do so. After all, Wu Huang and the others were independent cultivators. It was impossible for him to keep them in the world that he opened up. If that was the case, what difference would there be between them and Luo Fan's vassals? Wu Daozi's expression didn't change when he saw Luo Fan send them away. He didn't make any move to stop him. His eyes followed Luo Fan's movements and looked down. His gaze seemed to pass through endless obstacles and see where Wu Huang and the others were. "How about this?" Luo Fan smiled. "Sure," Wu Daozi said calmly. As he spoke, he turned his gaze back to the 160 million era vortexes, and his expression returned to its previous state. Seeing this, Luo Fan shook his head and directly stepped into the palace gate that had been formed by the 9-layered, three-dimensional talisman. Because the surrounding Yuan Qi had already solidified, Luo Fan looked like he was sealed in the crystal along with the palace. However, when he stepped into the palace, it did not affect the surrounding solid Yuan Qi. It was as if the solid Yuan Qi did not exist, and the solid Yuan Qi did not suffer any damage or destruction. There are still 6 billion years left. I hope they can make enough progress in these 6 billion years otherwise. After Luo Fan stepped into the 9-layered, three-dimensional seal, his expression relaxed, and such a thought flashed in his mind. There were still 6 billion years left before the world would shatter into countless fragments and create the first era, the Primordial era. If Emperor Wu and the others had made sufficient progress in these 6 billion years, their cultivation would have risen to a high enough level. Perhaps they would have been able to survive the destruction of the world. If they couldn't, Chapter 1003. Luo Fan, who was in the age of chaos, was currently floating in the void. In front of him was the stellar system where the era vortex was located. He didn't miss a single thing about what his clone had encountered on the unbroken Earth. Fortunately, my real body didn't go there. Otherwise, I'm afraid that this matter would be completely irreversible. Luo Fan thought so, his heart filled with a kind of joy. Although his clone didn't seem to be in any danger in Shielan Cliff, and Wu Daozi didn't seem to care about his actions, he was still in someone else's territory. After all, he was being controlled by a peak quasi-sage cultivator. His entire life depended on the other party's mood. For any self-reliant cultivator, such a fate wouldn't make them happy, even if it was a good thing, let alone Luo Fan. Luo Fan frowned as he looked at the stellar system in front of him. At this time, the surface of the galaxy looked the same as before, but in Luo Fan's eyes, he could see a very strange bridge directly across the entire galaxy from outside the galaxy, directly inserted into the vortex at the center of the 3 stars in the galaxy center. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind. After a long while, he sighed and waved his hand. He raised his hand and beckoned. In an instant, the bridge suddenly trembled, and the bridgehead that had been inserted into the vortex suddenly shrank and escaped from the vortex. Then the entire bridge shrank rapidly. Before long, it had shrunk from its original size of spanning the entire stellar system to a length of 3 feet. He flew out of the star system and arrived in front of Luo Fan. He seemed to be floating and sinking, as if there was an invisible hand holding up the bridge of time. After Luo Fan's clone ascended to the transcendent realm, he didn't need to refine it. The Bridge of Eras had already carved his aura into the depths of his clone's body. It was equivalent to Luo Fan automatically refining it. Luo Fan's clone and his main body had a one-to-one relationship. Being refined by his clone was equivalent to being refined by his main body. Because of this, he was able to use his will. The bridge directly broke away from the era vortex. He appeared directly in front of him. The Bridge of the Era was made from 36 magic treasures at the Great Perfection level. Luo Fan could only control the 2 magic treasures he made for himself and Wu Huang back then. However, after all these years of changes, the 36 treasures had long since fused into one. There was no longer any gap between them. Now, it was Luo Fan who wanted to separate them. It was already very unlikely. With a thought, Luo Fan raised his hand and lightly clapped. The Bridge of Eras spun. Then, it turned into a mysterious brilliance. This light was the essence of the magic treasure, the essence that had changed after being refined by the vortex of time for countless years. This included the essence of the 36 magic treasures that had been constructed during the construction of the Bridge of the Ages. This was something that Luo Fan had already known for a long time. But apart from that, it also contained a strange existence that didn't exist before. It was a strange existence that was added to it after the vortex of the era. This existence was very mysterious, and it showed a faint bright red luster. It had the characteristics of the era trend, but it wasn't the era trend. Instead, it had gone through some inexplicable changes and seemed to be able to slightly guide the characteristics of the era trend. It was this existence that caused the Bridge of the Era to undergo such a mysterious change. It allowed the Bridge of the Era to grow from a weapon that surpassed the Great Perfection realm to a weapon that was almost on par with the Transcendent realm. In other words, this existence was the power of the Transcendent path that Luo Fan's doppelganger had guessed. This isn't the power of a sage. It's just a product of the peak sage-to-be's power that has undergone some changes. Luo Fan analyzed the characteristics of this power and finally made a judgment. With a thought, he raised his hand and lightly clapped. In an instant, countless rope-like 3-dimensional talismans rushed out of his palm. They were like countless spiritual snakes that were entangled in the void. In the blink of an eye, they formed a rope-like 3-dimensional talisman with 72 layers. They suddenly strung together and directly poured into the brilliance that the Bridge of the Era had transformed into. As the rope was poured into the brilliance started to vibrate crazily, as if some living creature was struggling crazily. However, no matter how hard it struggled, the rope-like three-dimensional talisman didn't loosen its grip at all. Instead, it continued to crazily penetrate into the depths of the brilliance and kept wrapping around every essence of the brilliance within. The light formed by the original 36 magic treasures, together with the power of the almighty being behind the transcendence path, added up to a total of 37 lights. Under the effect of the 72 layers of three-dimensional talisman, they were separated bit by bit. In the blink of an eye, they turned into 37 brilliances that were scattered and locked down by the 72 layers of three-dimensional talisman. They were firmly fixed in the void, unable to move at all. The 36 brilliances formed by the magic treasures trembled slightly and directly condensed into an era bridge of the era in the void. It was 3 feet long and looked like a new moon, exuding an aura that surpassed the great perfection realm. This was the true appearance of this magic treasure. It was the appearance of a magic treasure that was completely free from all external influences. The remaining power had taken the form of a finger-like object and was frantically struggling in the rope-like lock. Every time it struggled, it produced earth-shattering power that caused the void to collapse, time to shatter, and all matter and energy to tremble unceasingly. It seemed as if it couldn't withstand the power and could be shattered at any time. The rope-like 72 layers of three-dimensional talisman firmly locked onto the finger. No matter how the finger struggled and shattered, it couldn't truly shake the three-dimensional talisman. It couldn't truly break free. So this is your true appearance. Luo Fan looked at the finger with a faint smile on his face. Combined with everything that his clone had seen, Luo Fan easily recognized that this finger was not something else. It was Wu Daozi's finger. The moment the finger appeared, Wu Daozi's expression changed slightly on Qilin Cliff. What's going on? Why is one of the paths suddenly cut off? He thought to himself as he carefully examined the 160 million era vortexes below. The 160 million vortexes had now turned into 159,999,999. There was one less than before. How is this possible? How can the path that Master has set up suddenly be cut off? Could it be that Master cut off this path? But why? Wu Daozi was bewildered as he pondered. After all, the era vortexes weren't his god art. The one who created the 160 million paths wasn't him either. Thus, although he could roughly feel what had happened, he didn't know the specifics. Which path did the problem lie in? However, he had no idea what was wrong with him. He couldn't be sure that the path that Luo Fan had appeared on had a problem. After thinking for a while, he finally believed that it was his master's arrangement. Although he was confused, he still put it aside. He continued to wait according to his master's plan. In the end of the world. At this time, Luo Fan started to move on the finger. His mind flickered, and the rope-like 72 layers of three-dimensional talisman suddenly spun and turned into the shape of a cauldron. Every layer of the talisman seal also changed accordingly. From the original rope shape, it also turned into a cauldron. After the 72 layers of three-dimensional talisman in the shape of a pill furnace were formed, it suddenly emitted endless heat and endless flames, crazily burning that finger. That finger kept twisting and changing inside the cauldron. In the end, it shook and exploded into a mist of blood. Then, it suddenly condensed into a human shape. This human shape was exactly Wu Daozi. However, compared to Wu Daozi, his eyes were a bit blank. His body was a bit illusory and his aura was too weak. After this Wu Daozi formed, he roared, "Who dares to attack me? This is disgraceful. Come out and accept your death." As he spoke, he shook his body. The instant the countless types of flames from the 3D talisman shot towards him, they completely broke away from the control of the 3D talisman and Luo Fan. They were completely controlled by Wu Daozi, who was formed by the blood mist and poured madly into Wu Daozi's body. As the flames poured in, Wu Daozi's body began to solidify at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, he had turned from an illusory blood mist into a real body without a trace of illusion. It was as if he had a real body of flesh and blood. He stood there, just like Wu Daozi, whom Zhenzhe had returned to you, was standing there. The aura on his body had climbed to an unimaginable level, and it was even much higher than Luo Fan's current aura. If this was in the outside world, just the aura of an existence like this could damage Luo Fan's combat ability and make him unable to perfectly use his spells. Fortunately, this place was constructed by Luo Fan's power. It was the interior of a 72-layered talisman. Everything here was equivalent to the law realm being reconstructed. The laws here were the same as the laws in the law realm. The restrictions here were also the same as the laws in the law realm. In other words, if one agreed with the law realm's worldview and cultivated a cultivation technique that was created according to the law realm's worldview, the power of one's spells would be greatly increased and one's combat ability might even be extraordinary. On the other hand, if one didn't agree with the law realm's worldview and cultivated a cultivation technique that wasn't created based on the law realm's worldview, then one would be greatly restricted even if one cultivated a cultivation technique passed down by a sage. One wouldn't be able to display all of one's prowess. Wu Daozi was the complete opposite. Although his aura had risen to the peak quasi-sage realm and was much stronger than Luo Fan, who was at the peak of the transcendent realm, he was still greatly restricted. Even with his remarkable abilities, he could only be confined within the talisman in the shape of a cauldron. He couldn't affect anything outside the cauldron. You're actually able to use my flames for your own use. A peak quasi-sage indeed lives up to his name. Luo Fan couldn't help but exclaim in admiration when he sensed the changes within the talisman. This finger was only one of the fingers that Wu Daozi had severed back then. The power within this finger. In other words, it was equivalent to the power of his finger back then. The reason why it had so many unimaginable uses and was able to increase the strength of the Bridge of Time wasn't because of the finger itself. Instead, it was some sort of mechanism that changed the finger. That was the method of a sage. At this very moment, after the finger was forced out by Luo Fan, it had already separated from that mechanism. This was the reason why Wu Daozi felt that the whirlpool had been severed. It wasn't because the whirlpool had collapsed, but because he had lost his sense of the whirlpool. At the same time, he had also lost his sense of the finger. This was because the finger had lost its sense of others. As a result, the power within it evolved naturally, and the imprint within it naturally unleashed the full potential of the finger's power. As a result, it formed this creature of power that looked like Wu Daozi. This creature of strength was born from Wu Daozi's imprint. Thus, it could be seen as a clone of Wu Daozi. However, this clone was too far away from his original body. Thus, it obtained complete freedom. This allowed Wu Daozi's original body to not be able to sense it. Although this clone was Wu Daozi, it was only a finger after all. Thus, although his cultivation had advanced to the peak of the quasi-saint level, due to the lack of power, he could only remain at the peak of the quasi-saint level. Luo Fan's thoughts turned, and he had already thought through everything clearly. Soon, he had come up with countless ways to deal with its nature. Let me see what kind of divine power a Dao Master has. After many thoughts flashed through his mind, this thought completely occupied his mind. With a thought, he grabbed the tridimensional talisman that looked like a pill furnace. His body trembled, and he directly broke through the barrier of the countless laws around him. He broke through the layer of nothingness behind the barrier and entered the place where the great Tao was. At this point, Wu Daozi's clone seemed to have sensed something and began to struggle madly. As it waved its hand, countless terrifying attacks smashed into the talisman, causing the talisman in the shape of a pill furnace to gradually deform. It was as if it could not withstand the attacks and was about to collapse. Facing this kind of attack, Luo Fan knew that his plan was correct. With a loud roar, the three-dimensional talisman suddenly broke through the darkness and directly drilled into the gap between the Earth's universe and the state of chaos. The moment he entered this place, the surrounding gray existences completely submerged him and the tridimensional seal. Although these gray existences were not true primal chaos, they still had some characteristics of primal chaos. Thus, they contained unimaginable power. The moment Luo Fan was hit by these grayish existences, he felt as if his whole body was about to shatter and turn into powder. At this instant, with a thought, countless magic power constructed a spherical, three-dimensional talisman around his body. Just like the three-dimensional talisman outside the law world, it directly enveloped him and the three-dimensional talisman in the shape of a pill furnace. The spherical 3D talisman was essentially the same as the 3D talisman outside the law realm. After it appeared, the collision force between the grayish existence and the 3D talisman was converted into light and absorbed into the 3D talisman, turning the interior of the 3D talisman into a bright space. There should be no more worries, Luo Fan thought as he looked at Wu Daozi's clone, who had stopped struggling. As a cultivator, he had an extremely keen sense of danger. Wu Daozi's clone was the same. He had struggled so fiercely before and was unwilling to enter the space between the universe and the primal chaos because he felt a strong sense of danger. At this moment, he had stopped struggling because the tridimensional seal's protection made him feel no danger. Such a fact showed that if Luo Fan wanted to kill him, he only needed to throw him directly into the grayish existence outside. The grayish existence would naturally react and directly kill him without him having to do anything. As a result, he was in an invincible position and would no longer be in any danger when fighting Wu Daozi. Even though he thought of this, his actions did not have the slightest hesitation. He casually pointed at the three-dimensional talisman in the shape of a pill furnace. The three-dimensional talisman suddenly shook and collapsed in an instant, revealing the existence inside the three-dimensional talisman. It was Wu Daozi's clone. The moment Wu Daozi's clone appeared inside the tridimensional seal, an extremely terrifying aura spread from his body and enveloped the space within 10,000 kilometers of the tridimensional seal. As for the three-dimensional talisman itself, it emitted cracking sounds, as if it could not bear the burden and could collapse at any time. "Are you the one who offended me?" Wu Daozi's clone roared when he saw Luo Fan. From the looks of it, he did not know Luo Fan. "You don't know me?" Luo Fan could not help but ask. "Who are you? How could a disciple of a saint know an ant-like person like you?" Wu Daozi's clone looked at Luo Fan in disdain. Chapter 1004. So this time Vortex is not your method. Luo Fan understood many things in that instant. The finger did not recognize him, which meant that the finger had never had any connection with his main body. Once this was confirmed, it was possible that Wu Daozi did not know about the end age that he was in. He could not be certain of the path that led to this end age and which path it was. Clearly, this meant that the age of chaos that Luo Fan's main body was in was not within Wu Daozi's sight. In other words, as long as this path was cut off, Wu Daozi would not be able to affect Luo Fan's main body at all. After understanding this, how could Luo Fan not be overjoyed? In his joy, Luo Fan didn't hesitate at all. With a thought, he raised his hand and grabbed at Wu Daozi's avatar. In an instant, Wu Daozi's avatar suddenly became sluggish. It was as though he had suffered some kind of pressure that could not be resisted. His entire body was suspended in the air, and he was unable to move at all. His entire body continued to tremble and vaguely showed signs of turning back into a bloody fog. Just at this moment, Wu Daozi's avatar roared and flames surged around its body. Countless strange flames instantly enveloped its body and formed a huge lotus flower around it. This lotus flower was extremely exquisite. As it floated in the air, it was like a real lotus flower. One could even faintly see a few drops of dew on the lotus flower. The moment the lotus flower appeared, Luo Fan suddenly frowned, because he felt that the space-time where Wu Daozi was had already broken free from his control. It was as if it had completely broken free from the space-time inside the 3D talisman. Under such a situation, the pressure he had exerted on Wu Daozi's avatar with the help of the space-time energy was naturally unable to continue affecting him. Instead, it was shifted to another place, to the huge lotus outside. As for the lotus flower, it was its own space-time, the ability to withstand the power of space-time. Naturally, it wasn't something that Wu Dao Zi's avatar could compare to. For a moment, it was hard for it to be of any use. Faced with such a change, Luo Fan moved. He took a light step forward. In the blink of an eye, he was already in front of the lotus. He clenched his fist and punched at the lotus flower. Countless three-dimensional talismans flashed on his fist in an instant. These three-dimensional talismans didn't have a real form, but they turned into light. They gathered into a ball and formed the phantom of a fist, which fiercely smashed towards the lotus. Although the lotus flower contained boundless mysteries, it was only borrowing the flames emitted by the three-dimensional talisman that looked like a pill furnace. Under such a bombardment, its structure did not suffer any damage, but the flames on it began to gradually extinguish as if they were being blown by a strong wind. In the blink of an eye, the only thing left was a lotus flower shadow that wrapped around Wu Dao Zi. At this moment, Wu Dao Zi didn't panic at all. There was only an indescribable rage in his eyes. He roared and shook his body. Hundreds of millions of strange beasts rushed out of his body. In the blink of an eye, they densely covered the void within a radius of tens of thousands of miles inside the three-dimensional talisman. These strange beasts were all things that Luo Fan had never seen before. However, he could vaguely find traces of them among all the creatures he had seen in the past. These creatures covered the entire space-time. The aura they emitted connected together, forming a strange domain that directly wrapped around Luo Fan. This weakened Luo Fan's perception of the three-dimensional talisman to the extreme. In a trance, he even felt that this wasn't his three-dimensional talisman, but a real world. His advantage in the three-dimensional talisman was actually weakened to the extreme. After this was done, Wu Dao Zi sneered. His body flickered, and he directly crashed into Luo Fan's defensive circle. He raised his fist and directly punched at Luo Fan's chest. This punch seemed to contain all the martial principles of the universe. In front of his fist, a strange existence that emitted a chaotic aura was constantly being born and being annihilated at the same time. When Luo Fan sensed the power of this punch, he was shocked in his heart. This punch was not something that a transcendent cultivator could unleash. This kind of aura that was above the world and the great path was so powerful that it made people feel despair. When he sensed the power of this punch, Luo Fan instantly understood that if he was hit by this punch without holding anything back, his body would instantly collapse. There would be no accidents. Although being hit by this punch was not fatal for Luo Fan, he would have to spend a long time to condense it again. This would delay his cultivation for a long time. This was obviously not something that Luo Fan could accept. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, his body had already reacted. In an instant, a bright red light flashed in front of him. His fist seemed to transcend time and space. It appeared in front of Wu Dao Zi's clone's fist without any process. Bright red light was not the mystery of the tide of the times. Instead, it was a mysterious light that Luo Fan had created based on his understanding of the tide of the times and his own power. It was a mysterious light that contained that mystery, but completely belonged to him. Its power was shocking. This mysterious light directly blocked the gray existence in front of Wu Dao Zi's clone's fist. The moment the two collided, the bright red mysterious light that Luo Fan had emitted was smashed into pieces like a piece of paper. It looked like it was breaking dry weeds and was extremely straightforward. However, Wu Dao Zi did not show any signs of happiness. Luo Fan did not show any signs of dispiritedness. On the contrary, Wu Dao Zi's expression tightened. Luo Fan, on the other hand, revealed a smile. Just then, Luo Fan's fist finally landed on the strange grayish existence. In an instant, the grayish existence collapsed with a loud bang. It was also as easy as breaking dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. Then, Luo Fan's fist collided with Wu Dao Zi's fist. At that moment, Wu Dao Zi let out a cry of agony. His entire body stagnated in the void. Then, like a balloon with countless holes, countless blood mists rushed out of his body, turning the entire void inside the three-dimensional talisman into a blood-red color. Just as Wu Daozi's entire body was about to explode, he suddenly retreated. The countless mystical beasts in the surroundings instantly appeared in front of him, blocking between him and Luo Fan, bearing the continuous bombardment of Luo Fan's fists. Although each bombardment caused these mystical beasts to collapse and die, every time he blocked, it still slowed down Luo Fan's fist by a little. In the end, after who knows how many beasts died, Luo Fan's fist finally reached its end. It could no longer attack Wu Daozi. The explosion of the bright red light just now wasn't because of the bombardment of the grayish existence, but because Luo Fan took the initiative to explode it. It was precisely because of this explosion that the grayish existence that contained the aura of primal chaos was no longer dense. This allowed Luo Fan's fist to easily break through this grayish existence, causing a huge impact on Wu Daozi's body. Wu Daozi sensed this change, which was why his expression changed. If my main body was here, that move just now would have definitely destroyed your body and soul. Wu Daozi roared in anger. Luo Fan smiled and said, "How can your original body transcend time and come here? This is the future of who knows how many trillions of years later." Damn it! Wu Daozi's avatar let out a loud roar. Something inside his body cracked open, and his entire body solidified at a speed visible to the naked eye. His aura also became stronger and stronger, more and more terrifying. Luo Fan's mind moved. He raised his hand and pointed. The 72 layers of three-dimensional talisman suddenly shook and instantly changed its appearance. In an instant, the space-time inside the three-dimensional talisman evolved into a boundless universe with this change. This universe seemed to be similar to the Earth universe outside. It also had endless stars, planets, and countless incredible sceneries. However, in essence, it was far from Earth's universe. Here, there was no trend of the times. The Earth universe was a perfect world that could be compared to the primordial world. Its true essence was not in the vast and boundless void of the universe. Instead, it was in the era that caused the Earth's universe to have a reincarnation every 6 billion years. Even sages could not cross it and had to avoid it. All magical powers that could travel through time could not reverse it. It was because of the existence of the era that the Earth's universe had become like this. The stability of space and time had fallen to such a level, but it was still a perfect world. In fact, if there was no trend of the era, although the Earth's universe was boundless, it could not even compare to a major kiliocosm. It would be a stretch to say that it was a medium-grade world. For the current Luo Fan, let alone a medium-grade world, he could even open a major kiliocosm. Even if this was only the 72-layer seal, it was still very powerful. The boundless universe in front of him was the same as Earth's universe. It was a vast universe that was billions of light years wide. In this universe, other than a lack of endless life and powerful cultivators, it was no different from Earth's universe. Luo Fan and Wu Daozi's avatars floated in this universe. It was as if they were floating in the void of Earth's universe. Wu Daozi could not help but be slightly startled when he saw the change in front of him. The aura on his body gradually weakened. In the blink of an eye, he recovered his original appearance. The fury in his eyes also gradually disappeared. Instead, it turned into a kind of disbelief and indescribable vicissitudes of life and helplessness. Is this the scene after the world breaks? He was in a trance as he sighed. Back then, Master said that the world would shatter, but all living things wouldn't go extinct. I didn't take it to heart, but I didn't think that the world would become like this. This is simply a desert for cultivation, he lamented. Suddenly, he waved his hand in the void. At that instant, the world changed, and a boundless continent formed under his feet, spreading out in all directions at an unimaginable speed. In the blink of an eye, it covered a range of 1 billion light years, forming a boundless land. The void above also changed at the same time and turned into a blue sky. In the sky, there were 10 suns hanging high, Luo Fan had originally opened up such a vast and boundless world in order to have more space to maneuver, so that he could better display his own magical abilities. He didn't think that this would cause Wu Dao Zi to react like this. All of a sudden, he hesitated. If he made a move now, he would gain a huge advantage. Perhaps he couldn't instantly destroy Wu Dao Zi's avatar, but he would be able to make Wu Dao Zi waste more energy. This would allow him to have a greater chance of winning. But, for some reason, looking at Wu Dao Zi's expression, he didn't have the heart to attack. After a long time, he sighed. He stopped planning to attack and said, "The world in the past was so vast. It really was a holy land for cultivation. Pity you guys destroyed it. You are not bad. To be able to cultivate to the peak of quasi-sage in such a barren land. If Master sees you, he will definitely take you in as a disciple." Wu Dao Zi's avatar looked at Luo Fan with a strange gaze and said, "You've changed so much that I can't accept it for a while. Can you explain it to me?" Luo Fan frowned. Haha. Wu Dao Zi's avatar laughed out loud. A moment later, his expression became a little lonely as he said, "I am only formed from one of the main body's fingers. Moreover, I'm not a natural finger. Instead, I'm a finger that instantly grew out after a finger was cut off. The meaning of my existence is to be a marker to connect these paths to my main body so that Master's plan can be completed. Now that I've been pulled out of that path, the meaning of my existence is gone. Fighting you is just a vent. Even if I kill you, what's the use?" So that's how it is. Hearing this, Luo Fan couldn't help but have a sudden realization. I really hope this future won't appear. Wu Dao Zi stood on the land he had created. His eyes pierced through the barrier of the world he had created and saw the boundless universe outside. He let out a long sigh. I hope this future will appear. Otherwise, wouldn't I not exist? Luo Fan shook his head and smiled. Why are you opposing for the sake of opposing? I don't believe that you don't know that whether this future exists or not, it won't affect you. Wu Dao Zi's avatar chuckled. At this moment, Wu Dao Zi's avatar had some of the temperament of Wu Dao Zi's main body. Luo Fan naturally wouldn't say anything else. He only chuckled. Right now, I don't have the mood to fight. Speak. What's your purpose in fighting me? Wu Dao Zi sighed. I just want to see what the peak of quasi-sage looks like and how much stronger it is compared to me. Luo Fan didn't hide anything. If that's your goal, then fighting me is the wrong way. Cultivators seek immortality, seek to be free and unfettered, but it's not just for fighting. You used a method of fighting to test me. What you saw was only the small path of fighting. If you want to see the true essence, that's impossible. Wu Dao Zi chuckled. Luo Fan heard this and smiled. Of course I know that. However, other than fighting, what other method do I have? The moment you appeared, you looked like you wanted to die with me. How can I hope to communicate with you? Wu Dao Zi was slightly stunned. Then, he couldn't help but smile and nod. As expected, it seems like it wasn't luck that you managed to cultivate to your current level. Since you no longer have any enmity towards me, why don't we talk about the Dao? Luo Fan smiled. That Wu Dao Zi smiled. Forget about the Dao discussion. I'm just an avatar formed from a finger. Even though I have strength, my cultivation level is blank. My various techniques are instinctive. If you want me to use them, it's not a problem. However, if you want me to use them, then it's beyond my ability. Luo Fan thought for a moment, then suddenly understood. This Wu Dao Zi looked so profound, and his divine arts were so powerful and terrifying. However, he himself was only at the peak of quasi-sage level. The power of his techniques were completely based on the mysteries of the seals that were engraved in the depths of his life source. Under such circumstances, it was as if he knew something but didn't know why. He could use it, but he couldn't display the mysteries within. This was the limitation of a living being with strength. The essence of a creature with power was already completely different from its original form of life. The various divine abilities and even the various memories in the power imprint were nothing more than nausea to it. It was like watching a movie and it could not perfectly fuse with it at all. He could only use those techniques because the nature of his power was able to use them. It was impossible for him to truly understand the mysteries within. In other words, no matter how powerful a living being's essence was, if they wanted to continue cultivating, they would have to cultivate again. Even if they had to cultivate according to their memories and the cultivation method they brought from their main bodies, it would not be much easier than cultivating out of thin air. Cultivating was fraught with difficulties, and one had to overcome countless bottlenecks. Therefore, at this moment, it was impossible for Luo Fan to talk about the mysteries of the peak quasi-sage level with Wu Daozi's avatar. Chapter 1005 N6BQRW 0 HXHB Lio however, after waiting for billions of years, or even tens of billions of years, when Wu Daozi's doppelganger once again cultivated to the peak of the sage-to-be level, would Luo Fan still need to discuss the mysteries of the peak of the sage-to-be level with him? As a powerful cultivator who cultivated from zero to the peak of the realm of transcendence, why would Luo Fan lack confidence? Why would he think that after billions of years, he wouldn't be able to break through the shackles of the realm of transcendence and become a Dao master? Luo Fan should have thought of this a long time ago. However, Wu Daozi was a clone of a cultivator at the peak of the great sage realm after all. Luo Fan wasn't sure what kind of techniques he had. What if his original body was at the peak of the great sage realm, which made him act differently? It was because of this mentality that he asked such a question. What a pity. Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh. Since you're talking to me like this, you must have a plan. Why don't you tell me about it? Wu Daozi looked at Luo Fan's pitiful expression and smiled. Luo Fan wasn't surprised after hearing this. Cultivators at their level naturally knew what was going on. Whether or not there was a plan behind each other's actions, it wasn't a secret to them. It was reasonable that Wu Daozi's clone could tell that Luo Fan had other plans. Thus, he nodded and said, "Before we carry out this plan, I need to clarify things first." "Ask away." Wu Daozi nodded and said, "Right now, do you have any thoughts of returning to your original body?" Luo Fan asked. Wu Daozi glanced at Luo Fan and said, "Why would you ask such a question? I'm not a clone created by my original body. I am merely a clone created by accident. Why would I have the thought of reuniting with my original body and letting my consciousness disappear?" When Luo Fan heard this, he was suddenly enlightened and finally felt completely at ease. To cultivators, the relationship between the clone and the original body was very mysterious. Somewhere in between. It could be that water and fire were incompatible, with the main body wanting to devour the clone and the clone wanting to devour the main body. It could also be that hardness and softness complemented each other, with the clone helping the main body and the main body helping the clone. As for what their relationship was, it would depend on the appearance of this clone. Was it the initiative of the main body? If the main body took the initiative to refine an avatar, then during the refining process, the avatar would be destroyed. Naturally, the nature of the avatar had already been determined. Naturally, he would not completely isolate the avatar. He would allow the avatar to connect with his own will so that it would not become an independent entity. Under such circumstances, the doppelganger was the main body, and the main body was the doppelganger. The two were two, and two were one. There was no essential difference. In this way, obviously, the doppelganger wouldn't want to be independent and devour the main body. On the other hand, if the avatar didn't appear because the cultivator didn't actively refine it, it would be a completely independent entity. In order to maintain its independence, the avatar wouldn't take the initiative to fuse with the main body. Even if there was a chance to kill the main body, he would not let it go. This Wu Daozi's avatar was obviously created by the second method. It was a passive avatar. This point could be seen from the fact that Wu Daozi's avatar didn't have all the abilities of the main body. It couldn't display the power of a peak quasi-sage. After all, if the avatar was created by the main body, then there wouldn't be much difference between it and the main body. What a main body knows, the avatar should know too. Even if the avatar couldn't perfectly display the cultivation of the main body, it definitely wouldn't be unable to display it. If that's the case, then we will have a chat. Luo Fan nodded. He smiled. Please. Wu Dao Zi's avatar gestured. Luo Fan raised his hand and clapped. The boundless universe shook and disappeared without a trace. Seeing this, Wu Dao Zi also lifted his foot and stomped on the ground he had created. In an instant, the sky trembled. This piece of land that was like the scene before the universe had shattered suddenly shook. Then, like snow under the scorching sun, it melted and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. In the end, the 72-layer 3D seal was only left with the initial space of tens of thousands of miles. Seeing this, Luo Fan raised his hand and waved it in the void. The three-dimensional runes around the void instantly changed their appearance. The original 3D seal had completely disappeared. What replaced it was transparent. One could even say that it was a screen of light. Countless lights and shadows appeared. Those lights and shadows were the scene outside the 3D seal. In a strange gray world, there was a huge black sphere floating in the air. On this sphere, there were 3 directions and there were 3 cave residences. Each of them exuded an extremely powerful aura. It was the 12,960-layer 3-dimensional talisman seal, where the Law Realm was located. Those 3 residences were the residences of Taoist Gentian and the other 2. Seeing this scene, Wu Dao Zi's avatar couldn't help but be startled. He asked, "Where's this place? Could it be chaos?" His reaction was very similar to Taoist Gentian's reaction. Obviously, although he was at the peak of the quasi-sage level, he was still below the sage level. However, there was no real difference in essence. He still couldn't completely surpass the limits of the quasi-sage level. Seeing this, Luo Fan smiled slightly, shook his head, and said, No, this place isn't chaos. This is the gap between heaven and earth and chaos. The gap between heaven and earth and chaos. Wu Dao Zi was taken aback. After carefully analyzing for a while, he sighed and said, "As expected, this place has the various things that the world has, and there is also an incomparably dense aura of chaos. Indeed, such a situation can only appear in the gap between the world and chaos." After all, Wu Dao Zi was at the peak of the quasi-sage level. After being reminded by Luo Fan, he finally discovered this place. Then, Wu Dao Zi shifted his gaze towards Luo Fan. His eyes were full of admiration. "I didn't think your cultivation technique would be this mysterious. Not only can it allow you to sense this place, but it can also allow your real body to enter the gap between heaven and earth." Compared to Taoist Tian and the rest, Wu Daozi was much more knowledgeable. After understanding where this place was, he quickly reacted to how powerful Luo Fan, who was able to bring him here and even set up a defense to protect him, was. He could not stop praising Luo Fan. Hearing Wu Dao Zi's praises, Luo Fan couldn't help but smile. "I wonder if you are interested in cultivating this technique." Wu Dao Zi's eyes lit up when he heard this and said, "I'm really interested." How could Wu Dao Zi not be interested in such a technique? This was the gap between heaven and earth and chaos. From the memories that he inherited from his original body, he heard his master, the ancestor of all monsters, talk about it. He vaguely knew about the existence of such a mysterious place. However, with his cultivation, no matter what he did, no matter what method he used, he couldn't find the gap between heaven and earth and chaos. He even tried to borrow the power of a saint, but no matter what, he couldn't find the gap between heaven and earth and chaos. By borrowing the power of a saint, he could naturally step into chaos. However, once he stepped out of heaven and earth, he would be in chaos. He would directly cross the gap between heaven and earth and chaos. Plus, he couldn't last long. Every time he borrowed the power of a saint, he had to pay an unimaginable price. God knows how many years of cultivation would be needed to recover. It was because he had searched for it before that he desperately wanted to be able to enter and exit this place at any time. Under such circumstances, a cultivator who could easily enter and exit this gap told him that he could teach him the technique he used to enter and exit this place. How could he remain calm? Seeing Wu Dao Zi's anxious expression, Luo Fan became more confident. He was even more confident about whether his plan would succeed or not. He raised his hand and pointed. Countless three-dimensional talismans rushed out of his finger and gathered in the air. In the blink of an eye, they turned into a 72-layer three-dimensional talisman. This three-dimensional talisman was constantly changing and had no fixed shape. However, anyone who saw it would be able to match it with any shape in their mind. The more one looked at it, the more it looked like it. Even after looking at it for a long time, one's senses would become distorted. The originally ever-changing, formless talisman would become the shape in one's mind. Friend, do you know that one of my avatars is in the hands of your original body? All life, death, illusion, and destruction are out of my control. Luo Fan said to Wu Daozi. Wu Daozi nodded. Though I can't see it, I can guess. Luo Fan said calmly. Since you know, then you should know what I'm worried about. Wu Daozi sighed. I understand. If my cultivation method reaches your level, then I can borrow the characteristics of the space between heaven and earth and primal chaos to transcend time. I can transcend time and connect to my original body. I can even let my original body have this method and cause immeasurable damage to you. To Wu Daozi, who had studied the space between heaven and earth and primal chaos, the characteristics of this space were not a secret to him. Because this space was between heaven and earth and primal chaos, it had the characteristics of the Earth's universe and the state of primal chaos. Time, space, matter, and energy formed a state of primal chaos here, but it was not as chaotic as the state of primal chaos. This chaos allowed this place to escape from the invasion of the Earth's universe and the cycle of time. At the same time, because of this chaos, the time of the Earth's universe did not have any meaning here that could not be surpassed. The state of primal chaos was a place where time, space, matter, and energy were extremely chaotic. If there was a being here, such as a saint, then as long as he was willing, he could enter any time in the Earth's universe, including countless cycles of time, including before the heaven and earth shattered. Of course, there was a limit to this, or rather, a prerequisite. That was, he had not existed at that point in time. This was not a limitation of the state of primal chaos, but a limitation of the being itself. This characteristic of the state of primal chaos could be said to be the most fundamental characteristic. The space between heaven and earth and the state of primal chaos was naturally contaminated by this characteristic. However, because this was only a boundary space and not a true state of primal chaos, this characteristic was not that strong. It could not allow beings that could enter this space to enter any point in time in the Earth's universe. Instead, it could only allow beings that could enter this space to sense the existence of their aura at any point in time. Among them, Luo Fan was able to occasionally sense his doppelganger and communicate with his doppelganger by relying on this special characteristic of the gap. Because of this characteristic, after Luo Fan's clone passed through the path of transcendence, he needed to borrow the laws between heaven and earth and the state of primal chaos to communicate with his clone. He could not directly communicate with his clone like before. Wu Daozi completely understood that this was the characteristic of the space between heaven and earth and the state of primal chaos. Naturally, he knew that if he cultivated Luo Fan's cultivation method to the same level as Luo Fan, then the extremely long time barrier between him and his main body would no longer be an obstacle for them to communicate. At that time, if he had evil intentions and contacted his main body from countless years ago, what awaited Luo Fan's main body would be a disaster. Unlike now, no matter what happened to his clone, his main body would not be harmed at all. Luo Fan listened to Wu Daozi's words and nodded. He nodded and said, "That's right. That's why. If I impart the cultivation method to you, without any preparation and without any restrictions, then I will be giving my life to you and letting you do whatever you want. This is impossible. That's why you must first hold my life in your hands. Only then will you impart the cultivation method to me?" Wu Daozi sighed. "Yes. Even if I'm willing to believe that fellow Taoist has no intention of contacting your main body, it's impossible for me not to take precautions. Luo Fan nodded. How can we not be cautious when it concerns our lives? Even I will definitely guard against this kind of danger. Wu Daozi sighed again. It seemed that ever since he was born. Thus, he kept sighing. Luo Fan raised his hand and sent the seal forward. The seal arrived in front of Wu Daozi, and he said, "This is a restriction. If you fuse it with your life source, I can control your life and death. If you have any bad intentions, I will be able to sense it. How to decide? It's up to you." Wu Daozi looked at the three-dimensional seal in front of him with an indescribable expression. His eyes flashed with a struggling light. After a long time, he finally let out a long sigh and raised his hand to receive the three-dimensional talisman. He said, "I didn't expect this. I didn't expect that there would be a day when I would take the initiative to fuse someone else's restriction with my life source. Fate makes fools of people." Then, he raised his hand and pressed the seal between his eyebrows. In the blink of an eye, these 72 layers of three-dimensional talismans drilled into the Mud Pill Palace between his eyebrows and through the Mud Pill Palace directly into his spiritual sea and then into his divine soul and finally into his life essence. After the seal merged with the life source, there was no change at all. There was not the slightest change. Even the three-dimensional talisman seemed to have disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared before. After Wu Daozi completely integrated the three-dimensional seal into it, Luo Fan directly sensed Wu Daozi's life source. His mind gave birth to a feeling that he could completely destroy it with just a slight thought. His expression relaxed, and he was finally completely at ease. If Wu Daozi wasn't willing to merge the seal with his life source, then it would be impossible for them to coexist peacefully. An even more intense battle would definitely occur. No matter what, Wu Daozi's life source was at the peak quasi-sage level. Even if he couldn't fully display the power of a peak quasi-sage, he still couldn't be underestimated. He would definitely have countless tricks up his sleeves. With Luo Fan's cultivation at the peak of the transcendent realm, even if he had such a huge advantage, it wouldn't be easy to defeat him. He might even have to pay a huge price to succeed. At this moment, Wu Daozi surrendered. This meant that there would be less trouble in the battle, and he wouldn't have to pay a huge price. This naturally made him feel relieved. Wu Daozi felt the changes in his body. Even though he couldn't pinpoint where the restriction was, he could vaguely find some traces. He knew that his life source had fallen into someone else's hands, and he couldn't control it anymore. At this moment, he felt sad and let out a long sigh. Seeing Wu Daozi like this, Luo Fan smiled and said, "Friend, don't worry. I'm only doing this as a precaution. I definitely don't have any intention of controlling you." As he spoke, he raised his hand and pointed. A bronze door appeared inside the three-dimensional talisman. After the door appeared, it began to open to both sides, revealing the world behind the door. The moment the door opened, an incomparably dense and strange aura surged out and instantly enveloped the entire space-time inside the seal. This aura was similar to the original aura inside the seal. However, it was more complete, more vast, and more powerful. Under the previous aura, Wu Daozi only felt a little uncomfortable and couldn't display his full strength. However, under this aura, he felt that his strength was greatly restricted. He could only feel an indescribable pressure and faintly felt that he couldn't display the power of a peak quasi-sage. Feeling the aura, Wu Daozi's expression finally changed, and he said, "Is this that world? This is the law world. This is my world." Luo Fan smiled and said, "This is also the place where Friend will cultivate from now on. As long as Friend enters, you will be able to see what's inside." As he spoke, Luo Fan waved his hand and invited Wu Daozi to follow him through the door and into the law world. Chapter 1006. The place where Luo Fan and Wu Daozi's clone appeared after entering the law realm was none other than the mountain where Wu Daozi's image was located. Similarly, the living being with power that Taoist Tong Sheng spoke was also here. The moment Wu Daozi's clone stepped into this place, he felt his power being greatly weakened. In an instant, he had already surpassed the Xiantian Grand Luo, but had yet to step into the demi-sage realm. This level of weakening reduced him to an unknown fraction of his original power, instantly turning him into the ant that he previously looked down upon. This feeling, to any cultivator, was an unimaginable misfortune. To Wu Daozi's avatar, it was even more so. In an instant, Wu Daozi's clone's expression became extremely ugly, and he felt like he couldn't even stand straight. Of course, this feeling of unsteadiness wasn't because he didn't have enough strength left to stand on his feet. Instead, it was because of the huge difference in strength, which made it difficult for him to get used to this feeling of lacking strength. Hence, this feeling of unsteadiness appeared. After a while, Wu Daozi's avatar finally caught his breath and smiled bitterly. I didn't expect the laws of your world to be so stable. I couldn't resist at all and was suppressed to this point. Luo Fan smiled. The laws of the law realm are still lacking in many areas. Compared to the real universe, it's still lacking a lot. This time, I wanted to borrow your power to perfect it. Wu Daozi stood on top of the mountain and looked up. His gaze pierced through the space-time mazes and saw the scene of the law realm outside of the space-time mazes. Although he was suppressed to the point where he couldn't even reach the demi-sage realm, he was still at high level. His perception wasn't something other cultivators could compare to. In an instant, everything in the entire law realm was seen by him. In just a short while, he had a rough understanding of the entire law realm. Following this understanding, Wu Daozi's clone gradually smiled. Looks like this law realm is more suitable for me than the outside world. If I change the cultivation system of the law realm, my improvement speed will definitely be faster than what Sage Master taught me. Luo Fan smiled and said, Since you agree, then I'm relieved. Would his clone enter the cultivation world of the law realm, or would his main body enter? It's up to you. I'll just send my clone in. It was impossible for the main body to perfectly experience all kinds of opportunities. It would be difficult to obtain true training, and it would be detrimental to one's cultivation. Wu Daozi's avatar thought about it and said, All right, how about I open up a cave for you here? Luo Fan said with a smile, There's no need. It makes no difference to me whether I have a cave or not. Since there was a fellow Taoist here, there was no need to establish a cave abode. I won't do it either. Wu Daozi's clone shook his head. Luo Fan naturally didn't care. Instead, he would have to busy himself with opening up a cave abode. Since he chose not to open up a cave abode now, it was naturally for the best. Wu Daozi's clone sat cross-legged and moved his mind. A strand of spiritual consciousness split out from his body and passed through the space-time maze around him, heading towards a certain location in the law realm's cultivation world. It entered a pregnant woman's stomach and turned into a baby waiting to be born. Seeing this, Luo Fan smiled faintly and took a step forward, directly arriving outside the law realm. On the surface of the three-dimensional talisman, Daoist Shintian and the other two were here. Their cultivation was still continuously increasing, but according to Luo Fan's estimates, it would soon stop. Once it stopped, they would naturally have to head into the law realm. He didn't need to care about that. Arriving here, Luo Fan looked at the murky existence that seemed like primal chaos. He let out a long sigh. He slowly closed his eyes and used his mind to borrow the characteristics of the gap between heaven and earth and primal chaos. It was connected to the doppelganger on the Qilin Cliff countless billions of years ago during the Age of Chaos, before heaven and earth were shattered. In an instant, everything about the doppelganger appeared clearly in his mind and mind. Wu Daozi, ancestor of all demons, what is your plan? Wu Daozi, what did you rely on to become a sage? As for ancestor of all demons, you predicted that heaven and earth would shatter billions of years ago. You could even plan what would happen billions of years later. I don't need to say much about your remarkable abilities, but why did you set up these transcendence paths to lead future cultivators to the time before heaven and earth shattered? Countless questions flashed through Luo Fan's mind. He couldn't understand these questions at all. He couldn't even understand them. With such questions, he paid more attention to what happened to his clone on Qilin Cliff. He didn't pay much attention to where his main body was. When Luo Fan's clone sensed his main body, he also sensed his main body. He naturally knew what his main body had done. Daoist Tong Sheng, Daoist Jintian, and Daoist Long and had submitted, the severing of the bridge of eras, and Wu Daozi's clone had submitted. To him, it was as if he had personally experienced all of this. After knowing that Wu Daozi's main body could no longer use the bridge of time to find the age of chaos, Luo Fan's clone heaved a sigh of relief. His clone and his main body were two sides of the same coin. There was no difference between them. His main body had nothing to worry about. To his clone, it was the same as having nothing to worry about. Under such circumstances, he was naturally at ease. At this moment, Luo Fan's clone was inside his palace-shaped 3D talisman. This place looked like a boundless starry sky. There was nothing but nothingness around him. Only a few stars were twinkling in the distance. Luo Fan waved his hand. The light from the stars condensed into a huge 3D talisman. It released an endless amount of yuan qi that began to accumulate around Luo Fan's body. Luo Fan's mind moved slightly, and his body shook. His body changed just like his original body. Whether it was his power or anything else, it all began to dissipate quickly. In a short while, he had become an ordinary creature without any extraordinary power. Following that, just like what his main body had done, he began to cultivate the Tao fruit great path that he had created specifically for the world of laws. The surrounding energy began to surge into his body frantically, pushing his cultivation realm to rise at an unimaginable speed. The power of the Tao of Power was limitless. It had only passed the great strength Tao Master and proved that one could reach the Tao Master realm. It could be said to be a path to the heavens. But that was not Luo Fan's own cultivation method. Although Luo Fan had tried his best to treat the world of power as his own, it was not really his. Deep in his heart, he still doubted this view. He could not truly agree with this view. No matter how hard he tried, how much he put in, it was impossible to push this cultivation method to a high level. It was even more impossible to unleash the full power of the Tao of Power. In other words, although the cultivation of the Tao of Power could allow Luo Fan to reach the end of the transcendent realm and allow him to possess endless divine powers, it was definitely not comparable to his cultivation of the Tao Fruit Tao. Whether it was the power of divine powers or other aspects, it was definitely not comparable to his cultivation of the Tao Fruit Tao. It was precisely because of this that Luo Fan dared not use the Tao of Power against him when he had a powerful enemy like Wu Daozi. Instead, he needed to change his cultivation method. The Tao of Power that was not suitable for him had to be changed to the Tao Fruit Tao that was most suitable for him. Although Luo Fan's avatar was a body of power and was formed from the power of an innate zenith heaven, his will was completely Luo Fan's own will. This cultivation method could give him a good future if it was suitable for his body. But if he wanted to unleash it to the best, he naturally needed a cultivation method that was suitable for his will. Just as Luo Fan was dispersing his cultivation and recultivating, the Qilin Cliff suddenly surged, and countless strange lights radiated from the three-dimensional talisman, enveloping the entire Qilin Cliff. These lights were extremely mysterious. There were almost all kinds of colors, and after they appeared, they were extremely mysterious. After they appeared, the entire Qilin Cliff seemed to be condensed by some kind of power. Faintly, there were signs of it being crushed. Wu Daozi was originally thinking about why there was an era vortex missing. When he suddenly felt this change, his expression changed slightly. "You really know how to cause trouble." As he spoke, he raised his hand and lightly patted the ground. In an instant, the entire Qilin Cliff seemed to be suppressed by some kind of indescribably terrifying power. No matter how the light shone, it was unable to move. No matter how the light shone, it didn't waver at all. It was unimaginably stable. That brilliance was born from the three-dimensional talisman, and its purpose was to absorb all the energy, vitality, and origin of the outside world to replenish the consumption of Luo Fan's recultivation. It wasn't necessary, but if it was, it would greatly increase the speed of his recultivation. If it was in his own place, Luo Fan naturally wouldn't be willing to do this. But in this Qilin Cliff, in the dojo of a cultivator who was obviously plotting against him. Why would he be polite at all? Although it couldn't absorb the origin of Chelan Cliff, the light wasn't discouraged. Instead, it changed its direction and began to absorb all the Yuan Qi in the void. Even the will of Wu Daozi that filled the void was not spared. It completely scattered it, erased all the imprints in it, and completely integrated it into the Yuan Qi and the three-dimensional talisman. This caused the Yuan Qi sea around Luo Fan to gradually thicken and expand. The light didn't stop. It was like there were 10 suns in the sky covering the entire Chelan Cliff. It made the entire Chelan Cliff colorful. Wu Daozi frowned at this, but since he had already decided to wait no matter what Luo Fan did, he naturally wouldn't change his mind because of such a small matter. With a slight thought, he slightly restrained his will that had spread throughout the entire Chelan Cliff and fused it with the main body of the Chelan Cliff. He also used his own strength to suppress it. He didn't care about anything else and let Luo Fan do whatever he wanted. As a result, the Yuan Qi, power, and origin absorbed by the light naturally decreased a bit. But it was only a bit. Overall, it was still quite impressive. Luo Fan only set up a program for the three-dimensional talisman. After that, no matter what the talisman did, he just continued to circulate his qi and blood to cultivate. As for how much the three-dimensional talisman could benefit from it, he didn't care. Luo Fan had many experiences with recultivation. His main body in the untainted world had already recultivated twice. His avatar in the Earth universe had recultivated once. His avatar of strength had also recultivated once. Excluding the avatar in the Great Tianyuan world, he had already recultivated 4 or 5 times. He could definitely be said to be very experienced. However, the recultivation this time was different from the previous times. This time, it was a recultivation that completely changed his worldview. Compared to simply recultivating from scratch, it was many times more difficult. The worldview was a form of understanding of the world. A different worldview. It was a completely different way of understanding the world. Although Luo Fan's avatar had a 1-2 relationship with his main body, from the beginning, he treated the inheritance of Dao Lord Dali as his own worldview. He deeply engraved it in the depths of his life origin. It was also because of this that his avatar could cultivate so smoothly. It didn't just cultivate from the innate zenith heaven realm to the transcendent realm. In the process, it even fed back to his main body, allowing his main body's realm to rise to the transcendent realm. How could such an achievement be achieved if one didn't deeply integrate the power worldview? Even people in the secular world knew. The body had memories. The worldview was a kind of concept, and it also had similar characteristics to memories. Therefore, it would also be engraved on the body. Therefore, even if Luo Fan already had his own worldview of the laws, he still couldn't understand it. However, this avatar still agreed with the power worldview. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan's recultivation naturally couldn't be smooth. Almost from time to time, the power worldview would emerge from his body, attacking his will and his law worldview, making it impossible for him to fully immerse himself in the law worldview. Since he couldn't immerse himself in the law worldview, it naturally had a huge impact on his cultivation of the Tao fruit Great Tao that was created according to the law worldview. This caused Luo Fan to recultivate the Tao fruit Great Tao at a speed. It was many times slower than his main body. After spending a year, he finally obtained the Earth Immortal Tao fruit from scratch and became an itinerant immortal. After that, he spent another 10 years. Only then did he break through to the Golden Immortal realm and obtain the Grand Unity Tao fruit. At this point, his body had almost been completely transformed in the process of cultivation. Although there was still the deeply hidden power worldview that affected his soul, it was much better than before. This also reduced the impact on his cultivation speed. Therefore, after another 10 years, he broke through to the Grand Unity Metal realm and obtained the Zenith Heaven Tao fruit. After obtaining the Zenith Heaven Tao fruit, the power worldview that was deeply engraved on his body finally disappeared due to the complete transformation of his body, leaving nothing behind. After that, Luo Fan's cultivation speed was no longer affected in the slightest. It seemed to be improving day by day. After another 10 years, he cultivated the Zenith Heaven Dao fruit to the peak of the Zenith Heaven Metal realm and reached a level where he could enter the perishment realm at will. The Dao fruit, great Dao that Luo Fan cultivated was completely created according to his law worldview. It was the most suitable Dao for his cultivation in the countless perfect worlds and the entire river of time. Therefore, he could unleash the power of this Dao of cultivation absolutely perfectly. As a result, the power of his divine ability was even comparable to the level when he was at the peak of the perishment realm. Fortunately, I recultivated. Otherwise, I'll probably regret it in the future. Luo Fan could not help but feel lucky when he sensed the changes in his body. After feeling lucky, he continued to cultivate without any hesitation. Very soon, he broke through the perishment realm, void comprehension realm, Dao integration realm, one after another. After 100 years, Luo Fan had already broken through to the transcendent realm. Although he had just entered the transcendent realm and was still much weaker than when he was at the peak of the transcendent realm, in terms of divine ability, he was already much stronger than when his clone was at the peak of the transcendent realm. From this, it could be seen that he had improved greatly after recultivating. Are you done? You're so greedy. Do you really want me to kill you? At this moment, a loud roar came from the outside and entered Luo Fan's ears, waking him up from his cultivation state. The voice was extremely mysterious, as though it was some kind of unbelievable technique. It contained boundless power and was unimaginably condensed. It was like a peak quasi-sage level treasure that broke through countless barriers. Even Luo Fan's palace-shaped, 9-layered 3D talisman couldn't produce a perfect effect against the voice. Although it blocked a lot of the voice still penetrated through the barriers and entered Luo Fan's ears. The voice was Wu Dao Zi's. However, the exasperation in his voice was completely different from his previous calmness. It made one wonder if it was really Wu Dao Zi's voice. Luo Fan moved his mind and instantly sensed the scene at the Qilin Cliff through the 9-layered 3D talisman. When he saw the scene outside, Luo Fan understood why Wu Dao Zi was so exasperated. Chapter 1007. In a short 100 years, this paradise had turned into a barren desert. How could Wu Dao Zi, who viewed the Qilin Cliff with great importance, remain calm? To be able to endure until now, before shouting, Wu Dao Zi's patience was already amazing. Seeing this, Luo Fan smiled. Why does fellow cultivators say this? Didn't fellow cultivators say that I could do whatever I wanted? What was blocking Wu Dao Zi was his 9-layer talisman. For Luo Fan, it was nothing. Although he didn't use any spell to send his voice out, it easily passed through the 9-layer talisman. Because of the 9-layer talisman, it directly entered Wu Dao Zi's ears. There was a flash of anger on Wu Dao Zi's face. If you continue like this, so what if I have to swallow what I said before? Luo Fan chuckled. If fellow cultivator insists on doing this, I will naturally be powerless to stop you. Since Wu Dao Zi had even said this, it could be seen that the anger in his heart had reached a limit. If Luo Fan continued to provoke him, perhaps he would really become hostile. Maybe he wouldn't kill him, but it wouldn't be difficult for Wu Dao Zi to make him suffer a little. Therefore, after Luo Fan finished speaking, he didn't go too far. With a slight movement of his mind, the mysterious brilliance released by the 9-layered, 3-dimensional talisman suddenly disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared before. As the light disappeared, the vitality and origin energy from the outside world suddenly descended. It directly descended upon the Qilin Cliff that hadn't had any vitality or origin energy for hundreds of years. It finally received the vitality and origin energy from the outside world. In an instant, the Qilin Cliff was like a dry sponge. It began to frantically absorb the vitality and energy from the outside world, scattering it throughout the entire Qilin Cliff. The barren Qilin Cliff gradually began to give birth to new life. Wu Daozi felt the change in the Qilin Cliff and had the urge to burst into tears. Only when you lose it will you know how precious it is. He had cultivated in Cliff for hundreds of millions of years and had long become accustomed to it. He didn't think it was very precious, and he faintly felt that even if he lost it, it would be useless. All he had to do was rebuild one. That was why he said those words to Luo Fan. But over the past 100 years, as he watched the Cliff lose its vitality bit by bit, a sense of reluctance gradually grew in his mind. It was a kind of discomfort. That was the benefit of Cliff. Memories of his time on Cliff. It suddenly emerged from the depths of his memory, making it more and more difficult for him to give up this Cliff. In the end, finally, just as the Cliff was about to be destroyed, he angrily opened his mouth and stopped Luo Fan from destroying the Cliff. At this moment, seeing that Cliff was gradually recovering, he actually had a wonderful feeling that his whole body was gradually recovering. In a trance, he suddenly had this kind of faint understanding. Towards life, he had a deeper understanding. Although his cultivation level did not increase immediately, but he felt that the bottleneck that shackled his cultivation level seemed to weaken slightly. Could this be Master's plan? While Wu Daozi was overjoyed, this thought appeared in his mind. In the eyes of all cultivators, a saint was omnipotent. This concept had almost become a kind of belief, an indestructible belief. Under such circumstances, if one followed the sage's instructions and obtained an unexpected benefit, no matter what cultivator, they would naturally regard the benefit as a gift from the sage. If they suffered any injuries, they would only regard it as the sage's scheme, a test from the sage. Wu Daozi had a saint as his teacher. This kind of idea was even deeper in his heart than normal cultivators. Therefore, after obtaining the benefits, he immediately thought this was a gift from the saint. With such a mentality, an inexplicable sense of gratitude surged in his heart. He even had more confidence in whether his plan would succeed or not. With this increase in confidence, his gaze towards the 9-layered talisman that Luo Fan was no longer angry. Instead, there was an inexplicable sense of expectation. Who knew what he was looking forward to? Luo Fan naturally didn't know that Wu Daozi would gain new enlightenment because of his actions. The calmness he encountered in his cultivation realm was slightly loosened. At this moment, he once again threw himself into wholeheartedly cultivating. This avatar's cultivation realm had only just advanced into the transcendent realm. There was still a long way to go before he reached the peak of the transcendent realm. In other words, he still had a lot of room for improvement. He could increase his strength to another level. The 5 realms above, the primordial zenith heaven, and below the sage were very special realms. Entering extinction, void enlightenment, unification, transcendent, and Tao Master formed a ladder to become a sage. As long as he walked step by step, he would be closer to the sage realm. Finally, he would reach the end of the Tao Master realm. As long as he broke through a bottleneck, he could become a sage. In fact, these 5 realms were different from all the previous cultivation realms. This could be seen from the fact that Luo Fan's Tao fruit was still the Zenith Heaven Tao fruit in these 5 realms. He didn't transform into the entering extinction Tao fruit or the void enlightenment Tao fruit. The difference between these 5 realms was, in fact, only the difference between realms. In other words, as long as the understanding of the realms was enough, even without cultivation, one could improve one's cultivation realm, strength, and physical strength to the corresponding level. In other words, if Luo Fan directly understood the end of the Tao Master realm, then he wouldn't need to cultivate or cross the many realms between the end of the Transcendent realm and the end of the Tao Master realm. He could directly become a Tao Master and push his cultivation realm to the end of the Tao Master realm. According to this situation, normally, if Luo Fan was willing, this avatar could directly step into the Transcendent realm and reach the end of the Transcendent realm. There was no need for any process or cultivation. It could be done with just a thought. Not only this doppelganger, but his body in the Dharma ending age, his body in the untainted world, and even his doppelganger in the great Tianyuan world also had this characteristic. However, There were obviously disadvantages in this way. With just a thought, he could push his cultivation to the limit of what he could achieve, even though he was indeed in that realm. But that was only the foundation. At that level, the divine ability power and strength obtained were the divine ability power and strength obtained by any cultivator who had reached that level. If Luo Fan really did this, then after he pushed his cultivation realm to the end of the transcendent realm, perhaps because of the foundation, his strength would be many times stronger than before he recultivated. It would also be many times stronger than it was now. But it was impossible to bring out all his potential. That was to say, it was definitely not as powerful as he was now, who pushed his cultivation realm to that level step by step. The difference might even be calculated by tens of thousands of times. It was precisely because of this consideration. Just now, Luo Fan knew that there was a shortcut to take, but he still cultivated step by step. If he wanted to take a shortcut, why did he have to recultivate? Since he had already recultivated, he naturally had to do everything he could to the best of his abilities. After this recultivation, another 100 years passed. After 100 years, when Luo Fan opened his eyes again, his cultivation realm had reached the state he was at before he recultivated. He had also reached the end of the transcendent realm. As for his strength, it was countless times stronger than it was back then. At this moment, he could even look at his previous self as an ant. Such a huge gap could be imagined. Sensing the powerful strength he had, Luo Fan couldn't help but let out a long sigh. An inexplicable smile appeared on his face. With a slight thought, he raised his hand and pointed upwards. In the blink of an eye, the universe collapsed. The boundless starry sky of the universe instantly turned into a paste, turning into a dusky expanse. After this patch of gray appeared, it began to gradually shrink. In the blink of an eye, it had shrunk to a radius of a few 100 feet. Following that, the paste became thinner and thinner, and the scene behind the paste was gradually revealed. It was a three-dimensional talisman that was made up of countless three-dimensional talismans. Before recultivating, this three-dimensional talisman seemed to Luo Fan to be the limit of what could be achieved with the same materials. No matter what, it couldn't be improved anymore. But at this moment, in his eyes, there was a huge room for improvement. His original construction method wasn't perfect at all. Using the same materials, he could at least increase the number of layers of the three-dimensional talisman by 1 or 2 layers. Of course, this was not because of how much his cultivation had increased, nor was it because of how much his understanding of the fruit of the way had increased. Instead, it was because of the changes in his body and the changes in his path of cultivation. He was now able to perfectly align with his worldview and clearly see many things that he could not see in the past. It was like an ordinary person who didn't have any changes in knowledge, but was myopic in the past, so he could see things in a blur. Many things couldn't be done perfectly because of this blurry vision. After wearing glasses, myopia no longer affected him, so he could naturally see more clearly and do things as perfectly as possible. However, as he thought about it, Luo Fan raised his hand and the three-dimensional talisman instantly collapsed. It turned into countless small, three-dimensional talismans and began to condense in his palm. In the blink of an eye, it condensed into a fist-sized talisman ball in his hand, and his figure reappeared on Chelan Cliff. After appearing here, he looked around and found that the entire appearance of Chelan Cliff had changed greatly compared to 100 years ago. It was no longer a desert like before. Instead, it had returned to its original appearance of fairyland. The exuberant vitality, the countless exotic flowers and plants, and the countless auspicious beasts naturally made people feel relaxed and happy. It seems that you have put in a lot of effort over the years. Luo Fan smiled and said. There was no need to say who he was talking to. Other than Wu Dao Zi, it couldn't be anyone else. Wu Dao Zi was currently at the edge of Chelan Cliff. Hearing Luo Fan's words, he said, "Destroying is of course easier than building. To restore what you have done, of course it won't be that simple." After saying that, he turned his head and looked at Luo Fan. There was a hint of seriousness and surprise in his eyes. "I didn't expect that you'd improve so much in just over 200 years," fellow Taoist. It seems that you'll be able to fight someone of a higher cultivation base than you. It seems that fighting above your level isn't impossible. Wu Daozi exclaimed. This is all thanks to you. If there wasn't such a powerful existence like you, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to improve so much. Luo Fan also smiled and stepped forward. In just a few steps, he had arrived at the edge of Qilin Cliff. He directly sat down next to Wu Daozi. It seems that another person is going to pass through that path. I wonder which area you are from. Luo Fan was taken aback and said. In front of him, among the 159,999,999 whirlpools in the boundless sea of clouds below Qilin Cliff, there were countless whirlpools. At this moment, there was a bright red light. This light was so blinding and mysterious. Luo Fan could tell that this was a product of the current of the times. To be able to cause such a big change in the whirlpools, one only needed to think for a bit to know that some kind of change was happening on that path. The most likely explanation for this change was that a cultivator was currently traversing that path. It was precisely because of this consideration that he said these words. Wu Daozi glanced at Luo Fan and said indifferently, This friend is much faster than you. Back then, you spent hundreds of years to activate the light to this degree, but this friend only used 10 years to do it. Wu Daozi glanced at Luo Fan and said indifferently, Is that so? I'm really looking forward to it. Luo Fan smiled. He didn't care about what Wu Daozi said. When he first entered the path of transcendence, his cultivation was only at the Khanate Grand Luo realm. He hadn't even reached the peak of the Khanate Grand Luo realm. After going through the step-by-step guidance of the path of transcendence, he finally broke through the Tao integration and stepped into the transcendence realm. But now, this cultivator who was creating the transcendence path had a very, very low chance of having sex with him. The most likely possibility was that he was already in the quasi-sage realm. He might be in the initial success, minor success, intermediate success, or even great success quasi-sage. Wasn't it only natural that he would be faster than Luo Fan on this path of transcendence with such a basic cultivation base? More importantly, Luo Fan's cultivation had reached the end of the transcendence realm. In other words, he had reached the end of the transcendence realm. This was the most important thing. From the beginning to the end of the transcendent realm, he didn't obtain it from the transcendent path. Even if the cultivator who was challenging the path of transcendence had a much stronger foundation than him, he was absolutely confident that he would be stronger than the other party. With all these considerations, why would he care if the cultivator was faster than him? Wu Daozi could sense that Luo Fan's mind wasn't shaken at all. He couldn't help but shake his head and smile bitterly. He knew that his little scheme from before was simply a joke to everyone. As an advanced quasi-sage, his cultivation of the Tao heart must have been perfected. How could he be shaken just because someone performed better than him? I wonder how much longer it will take for this Taoist to pass this path. Luo Fan asked with a smile. Based on your speed, it should be about 3 days. Wu Daozi calculated and said, Oh, I see. Looks like he's already at the 999th level. What awaits him next will be the dream realm. This thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. According to what Wu Daozi said, it should have taken him 30 days from the moment the light lit up until he reached the end of the path. In other words, it would be 1 month. From the moment he stepped onto the transcendence realm until he reached the end of the path, he spent a total of 100 years and a month. According to his calculations, when the light lit up, he should have reached the 999th level, which meant that he was about to enter the dream realm. The path taken by the cultivator in front of him was very likely to be the same as the path taken by Luo Fan, so it was very likely that he would soon encounter the checkpoint of the dreamscape. Of course, he obviously couldn't share this speculation with Wu Daozi. At this moment, he and Wu Daozi seemed to be on good terms. They were even sitting side by side, watching the boundless sea of clouds and the 159,999,999 whirlpools of time. However, this did not change the fact that Luo Fan was being coerced. After all, the relationship between the two was hostile. With this kind of relationship, How could Luo Fan confide in Wu Daozi? How could he share his secret speculation with Wu Daozi? 3 days passed by in the blink of an eye for Luo Fan and Wu Daozi. Unknowingly, 3 days had passed. During these 3 days, the red light from the vortex became stronger, more obvious, and more dazzling. Finally, the bright red light reached its limit after 3 days. Chapter 1008. Inside this light, even Luo Fan and Wu Daozi felt their eyes sting. They couldn't tell what was happening inside the light. They didn't know how long this lasted. Perhaps it was an instant, or perhaps it was several hours. When the light dissipated, an old man was floating in the sky with a blank look in his eyes. Wu Daozi's reaction was extremely fast. When he saw the old man, he casually waved his hand, and the old man appeared on the Qilin cliff. The old man's eyes were blank, as if he was the fastest to react to the changes in the outside world. Luo Fan looked at this situation and couldn't help but sigh. It seemed like this was also the case when he came out. He thought that as soon as he came out, he was standing on the Qilin cliff. As soon as he came out, he saw a world that was completely different from the Earth in the Age of Chaos. However, in reality, there was a period of time that was completely blank in his memory. In this period of time, he even lost the ability to resist and could only let the other party do whatever he wanted. If Wu Daozi had been ruthless back then, perhaps he would have died and his soul scattered for an unknown period of time. Wu Daozi's expression was calm and indifferent. It was as if he didn't care at all. As for the change in Luo Fan's expression, it was as if he didn't care at all. Luo Fan looked at his expression and knew that Wu Daozi was purposely treating this new cultivator like this in front of him. It was to let him see how miserable he was back then and let him know how easy it was to kill him back then. Looks like he is still dissatisfied. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind, and the emotion that had just emerged from the bottom of his heart dissipated a lot. No matter what, he was very clear now, at that dangerous moment. No matter how miserable he was back then or how powerless he was, it didn't affect him at all. After a while, the new old man's body shook and the blankness in his eyes disappeared. He blinked his eyes and looked around. There was an indescribable shock in his eyes. Where is this? Just now, I barged into that era vortex and confused the era. What era is this? The old man muttered. Here. This was before heaven and earth had shattered. It is the world before all eras began, Wu Daozi said. His voice was extremely calm and clear, and it was directly sent into the old man's ears. When the old man heard this voice, he turned his head to look. He finally saw Luo Fan and Wu Daozi. He shivered. His eyes were filled with shock. Who the hell are you? What kind of place is this? The old man shouted. This old man was a great perfection quasi-sage. However, it was only equivalent to a great perfection quasi-saint who had transcended the great perfection. In fact, it was not even great perfection. Compared to Luo Fan, he was many times worse. It could even be said that if Luo Fan wanted to, he could easily crush him into powder with a single finger. Though Luo Fan's strength was shocking, his cultivation realm was not as good as Wu Daozi's. If it was like this for Luo Fan, then it was even more so for Wu Daozi. At that moment, Wu Daozi smiled. He raised his hand and pinched the air as if he was picking up an ant. Just then, the old man suddenly felt his body become sluggish. He could no longer feel the vast power he originally controlled. Even his originally stable cultivation realm seemed to show signs of instability because of this pinch. Suddenly having such a thought, the old man suddenly felt that it was difficult for him to even breathe. His eyes were filled with shock. It seems that he has learned his lesson. Seeing this, Luo Fan smiled slightly, and such a thought flashed in his mind. If it was the Luo Fan of the past, Wu Daozi wouldn't have been able to do it as easily as he did with this old man. However, the current Luo Fan wouldn't have been able to do it with such ease. The reason why Wu Daozi was doing this was because he had learned his lesson when he let Luo Fan go. It was because he let Luo Fan go that the Qilin Cliff suffered 100 years of misfortune. It almost destroyed billions of years of hard work. Therefore, when he saw a newcomer, He didn't want to treat Luo Fan the same way he treated him. Instead, he wanted to teach him a lesson so that he would be more obedient. It was a long time. Only then did Wu Dao Zi let go. The old man took in a deep breath. His body trembled for a while before he returned to normal. However, when he looked at Wu Dao Zi, he didn't dare to be as presumptuous as before. There was some fear in his eyes. This is the Qilin Cliff. You have passed through the path before, so I believe you have a good understanding of the development of the era. If you sense it carefully, you will know what time it is. Wu Daozi said. The old man frowned and closed his eyes to sense the world. After a while, he let out a long sigh and said, "So that's how it is. This place is indeed before the era began. The reincarnation restriction of the world has disappeared without a trace." After sighing, an indescribable joy appeared in the depths of his eyes. It was as if he had found what he had been dreaming of. "My name is Wu Dao Zi. I am the disciple of the saint, the ancestor of all monsters. May I know how to address you?" Seeing the old man walk over, Wu Dao Zi smiled and said. If he had said all this before, the old man would have disdained him and thought he was bragging. He wouldn't believe that he was the disciple of the saint. But after the encounter just now, he felt the power that made him feel hopeless. How could this old man dare to doubt Wu Dao Zi's words? He quickly bowed and said, "So you are the disciple of the saint. I am Taoist priest. Greetings, senior." Wu Dao Zi's strength was many times stronger than the old man's. To the old man, he was a senior. At least, according to the old man's culture, he was a senior. Luo Fan stood there and looked at the old man with sympathy in his eyes. It looks like this person is completely suppressed by the name of the saint and doesn't dare to have any other thoughts. This thought flashed through his mind, and the sympathy in his eyes when he looked at the old man became even stronger. However, Luo Fan's thought was a little presumptuous. Not every cultivator respected the sage as much as he did, and even suspected that the sage was scheming against them. To the cultivators of the Earth universe, the saint was a supreme and omnipotent existence. Since this kind of existence was omnipotent, why would they need to use cultivators who hadn't become saints? Under such circumstances, any arrangements made by the sage would only be a fortuitous encounter for them. Not being able to do anything was a disaster. Thus, normal cultivators, after passing through the path that brought them countless benefits, might have some doubts and fear. They might think that the person behind it had ulterior motives. They were scheming against them. But once they found out that this path was related to the saint, of course, they would get rid of this doubt. They would no longer think that the setting of this path would have any negative impact on them. All that existed in their hearts was gratitude. This had nothing to do with their stupidity. It was only about their thoughts. In comparison, people like Luo Fan were different. Seeing the patriarch Taoist reaction, Wu Daozi couldn't help but smile. He said, "You should work hard on cultivating on the Qilin Cliff. I believe that you should have gained a lot from passing through that path. Cultivating on this Qilin Cliff will definitely allow you to make a big breakthrough in your cultivation." Wu Daozi hadn't gone through the path of transcendence before. The conclusion he made was completely deduced from Luo Fan. Luo Fan's performance was too obvious. After coming out of that path, it had only been a short period of more than 200 years, but he had already made unimaginable progress. He was even on par with the peak of the sage-to-be. Although he had almost destroyed the Qilin Cliff, in his opinion, if Luo Fan had not obtained any benefits from that path, he would not have been able to see it. Hearing Wu Daozi's words, the patriarch Daozi couldn't help but be overjoyed. He said, "Thank you for your mercy, senior." Saying that, he bowed to the patriarch Daozi before carefully going to a place with the worst environment in the Qilin Cliff to open up a cave abode. Any place, even if it was a holy land for cultivation like Qilin Cliff, would not have a completely balanced environment. Some places would be better than others, and some would be worse than others. Even if it was worse, it would still be unimaginably better than the places outside the Holy Land, but it would still be worse than other places. Looking at the old man's cave, Wu Dao Zi was very pleased. He felt that Ziji's previous actions were too wise. This ancestral patriarch Taoist was indeed not like Luo Fan, who gave him a headache. Luo Fan looked at the Patriarch Daozi's appearance and couldn't help but sigh. During the conversation between Wu Daozi and the Patriarch Daozi had taken a few glances at Luo Fan. However, after Wu Daozi said that Luo Fan was a sage's disciple, the Patriarch Daozi directly threw Luo Fan aside and only had eyes for Wu Daozi. Even when he left to open up a cave abode, he didn't care about Luo Fan at all. He didn't even bother to get to know Luo Fan. Now, there were so many wonderful environments for him to choose from, for him to cultivate in, but he chose the worst Weiji out of all of them. This was a deep sense of servility. How could he not sigh? Of course, the Patriarch Daozi was a great completion quasi-sage who had passed 9,999 checkpoints on the Transcendence path. It might be too much to say that he was servile, but no matter what, this was not how a true cultivator should behave. Naturally, Luo Fan couldn't stand it. What a pity! Luo Fan sighed. What a pity! If you are like him, the benefits you will obtain in the future will be unimaginable. Wu Daozi looked at Luo Fan and said faintly, benefits? Cultivation depends on the body. Only the body that cultivates the body is the body that cultivates the body. Benefits given by others, no matter what, belong to them. Luo Fan looked at Wu Daozi and laughed. Wu Daozi frowned, but he didn't say anything. Luo Fan looked at Wu Daozi and said, I don't know what you're planning by setting up so many time vortexes in the future, but I'm sure that if you want to rely on this plan to become a sage, it's definitely not going to work. There is no other reason. It is because all of this is the plan of the Thousand Demons ancestor. What you will obtain in the end is just a gift from the Thousand Demons ancestor. Wu Daozi's expression changed slightly, but he still said something. Why don't you think about it? How many billions of years have passed since the world was created, and how many billions of years have passed with the help of the sages? If the sages could bestow Nango to people to become sages, how could there only be 7 sages in this world? I don't believe that the 7 sages didn't think about nurturing more sages in these billions of years. Luo Fan laughed. These words caused Wu Daozi's expression to change drastically. His aura was no longer concealed. It rushed out of his body in an unimaginable manner. It pressed down on Luo Fan. Luo Fan's expression changed slightly. The aura in his body was unleashed without holding back. It directly went up against Wu Daozi's aura. Wu Daozi was a pinnacle quasi-sage, or even the pinnacle of the pinnacle quasi-sage. His aura was so strong. It had already reached an unimaginable level. The aura that was emitted from his body. They condensed into countless lifelike strange beasts in the void. Every single one of these strange beasts was extremely strong and agile. It was as if they were real living beings. The moment they appeared, they charged towards Luo Fan crazily. They even displayed all sorts of techniques in the void. A flash of light and heaven and earth were destroyed. The hundreds of miles around Luo Fan's body seemed to have turned into chaos. Even space and time seemed to have become chaotic because of the techniques of these strange beasts. Luo Fan had already reached the peak of the transcendent realm. The power of his techniques could even be compared to a pinnacle quasi-sage. In addition, he cultivated the Dao fruit Dao that he created based on his own insights. The techniques that he displayed had reached the limit of his cultivation realm. Thus, although the aura that he emitted was not as terrifying as Wu Daozi's aura, it was not much different in terms of profoundness. After it was emitted, it directly condensed into countless strange-shaped, three-dimensional talismans in the void. They were like countless magic treasures. Every single talisman charged toward a strange beast. Similarly, they exploded with all sorts of powers and started to fight against those strange beasts. Although Wu Daozi was currently at his peak, he still remembered his master's instructions. Or rather, he still believed in his master's plan. He did not intend to kill Luo Fan, but merely wanted to teach him a lesson. Thus, he used his own aura to suppress Luo Fan. Wu Daozi stood at his original position with his hands behind his back. He then followed the aura and started to fight against Luo Fan. That Xuanzong Daozi had originally moved to the worst cultivation ground in the Qilin Cliff in preparation to open his own cave. At this moment, he suddenly sensed the undulations at the edge of the Qilin Cliff. He could not help but be shocked and carefully extended his perception over. When he sensed what was happening, he could not help but be shocked. He could not help but feel a surge of regret. He secretly regretted being so impolite to Luo Fan. This person is actually so powerful. Just his aura alone is probably enough to destroy my body and soul. I treated him like that before. If he was dissatisfied and slightly suppressed his aura, wouldn't I be finished? Thinking of this, the Xuanzong Daozi became even more regretful. The Xuanzong Daozi lived in a completely different future than the future that Luo Fan lived in. According to his calculations, the era he lived in was before the Age of Chaos. However, that era did not exist in the many eras before the Age of Chaos. It was an era of saint cultivators. In this era, the Xuanzong Daozi was only an intermediate quasi-sage. He was not the strongest expert of that era. During that era, there were a few supreme, great perfection quasi-sages that suppressed the universe, forcing all cultivators and living beings to submit to them. The reason why he entered the era vortex was that he had offended a great perfection quasi-saint of that era. He was chased by the quasi-saint until he had nowhere to go, and he had no choice but to enter the forbidden area. At that time, there were hundreds of cultivators who followed him. The weakest among them was a primordial pure yang cultivator, while the strongest was a quasi-sage in the great perfection realm. However, such a powerful force could not unite in the 9,999 levels because everyone had their own agendas. As a result, they were constantly depleted. In the end, there were less than 10 cultivators left in the 9 dream realms. After that, he was lucky enough to survive the many dangers in the 9 dreamlands and became the last survivor. With the help of others' sacrifice, he passed the 9,999 levels and raised his cultivation realm to the great perfection realm of quasi-sage. He passed the test of this path and came to the Qilin Cliff before the beginning of this era. Because of this experience, he did not have the mentality of a true peak expert, and his fighting was not very firm. Now that he saw how powerful Luo Fan was, he did not want to have a fight with him to achieve a breakthrough. Instead, he wanted to admit defeat and submit. All kinds of thoughts flashed through his mind, and the Xuanzong Daoist finally made a decision. If Luo Fandango survived, he would certainly curry favor with him. Even if he couldn't let Luo Fandango treat him as his best friend, he would certainly dispel his dissatisfaction towards Luo Fandango. If Luo Fandango could obtain some benefits from Luo Fandango, it would certainly be better. After making his decision, the Xuanzong Daozi smiled and stopped paying attention to the changes at the edge. He withdrew his perception and continued to open up his cave abode. Chapter 1009. Luo Fan's aura condensed into countless 3D talismans. Every 3D talisman had various mysterious uses. They were no weaker than the beasts that Wu Dao Zi's aura condensed into. The various techniques he used were all extremely mysterious. Every time they exchanged attacks, they would annihilate each other, turning this space and time into chaos. Before this world broke and became the Earth universe, the stability of space and time was even stronger than the primitive world. Compared to the Earth universe during the Age of Chaos, it was tens of thousands of times stronger. Moreover, it also had the mysterious characteristic of the primitive world that could not be broken if one's cultivation level was not high enough. However, this characteristic clearly had its limits. Luo Fan and Wu Daozi's cultivation realm was already close to the peak below the Saint realm. They had long surpassed the limits of this special space. With just a slight movement of their auras, they would naturally be able to cause shocking destruction, creating a chaotic state similar to primal chaos. The anger in Wu Daozi's heart gradually calmed down as time went on. After all, his will was incomparably firm. Luo Fan's previous verbal attack had made him angry out of humiliation, but after he had sobered up, he had already found many flaws in it. Perhaps it was the flaws that he thought. He refocused and his confidence stabilized. Therefore, his aura suddenly exploded. All of the mystical beasts turned into a strange creature that seemed to contain all the characteristics of mystical beasts and seemed to transcend all mystical beasts. It directly rushed towards Luo Fan in a manner that pervaded the world, wanting to completely crush the aura that Luo Fan was emitting. Seeing this, Luo Fan knew that Wu Dao Zi was no longer angry. At this moment, he no longer had the thought of making Luo Fan suffer. This aura attack was his last attack. If he could not dodge it, then everything would be over. If he could dodge it, then he would not bother him anymore. With this thought, he controlled his own aura and directly constructed a huge, mirror-like 3D talisman in front of Wu Dao Zi's aura. This 3D talisman was like a huge mirror. It directly blocked in front of the huge beast. Behind the mirror, like a real mirror, appeared a wondrous beast of the same size and appearance. There was even no difference in strength between it and the wondrous beast. It smashed into the mirror with the same posture. There was a loud rumble. The entire Qilin cliff shook violently at this moment. It was as if it could not withstand the impact and was about to break into pieces and turn into dust. At the same time, an invisible shockwave exploded from the point of contact between the mirror and the strange beast. It swept in all directions and covered millions of miles of the void. The ancestral Taoist cave abode was also within the range of the shockwave, and the cave abode he created collapsed. All of his efforts were for naught. Of course, this was also because he had only just begun to move, and the cave abode was not fully formed yet. It was only a prototype. If he had completed the construction of this cave abode, although this impact would have caused some damage to his cave abode, it definitely wouldn't have caused the entire cave abode to collapse and disappear like this. After the shockwave passed, everything returned to normal. Whether it was the mirror formed by Luo Fan's aura, or the shocking beast formed by Wu Dao Zi's aura, or even the chaos caused by the Battle of Auras, they all disappeared without a trace. The heaven and earth became clear again as if nothing had happened. Only Luo Fan and Wu Dao Zi stood opposite each other. What the saint did, what you can understand. For you to comment on the journey of a saint, you are just a frog in a well looking at the sky, a summer bug talking about ice. Wu Dao Zi snorted. He turned around, sat down cross-legged, and quietly observed the 100 million time vortexes in front of him. He no longer cared about Luo Fan. Luo Fan saw this. He smiled and said, "What is the truth? You will know in the future." Although the words he said to Wu Dao Zi were his own thoughts, the reason he said it was only to attack Wu Dao Zi. Whether Wu Dao Zi truly believed him or not was meaningless to him. Since Wu Dao Zi had already been attacked once, he was too lazy to dwell on this issue. Even though he believed that his way of thinking was not wrong and that Wu Dao Zi was walking on a fork in the road, he did not have the mood to care. Moreover, if he really used these words to convince Wu Dao Zi, he would instead regret saying them. Luo Fan didn't go to Wu Dao Zi's side like before. Instead, he sat down and watched the time whirlpools. Due to the appearance of the ancestral patriarch, he had seen the entire process clearly. Even if there were some parts that he could not understand, it was not something that could be solved by watching more. Therefore, it was meaningless for him to continue watching here. Therefore, why would he continue to stay there? In a few steps, he arrived at the most beautiful place in the Qilin Cliff. At this time, because of Luo Fan's previous actions, the entire Qilin Cliff had undergone a subtle change. Therefore, the place with the best cultivation environment had also slightly shifted. Therefore, he couldn't return to the place where he had stayed for more than 200 years. This place was quite far from where the ancestral Taoist was. Even though it wasn't as far as crossing the Qilin Cliff, it was still half the distance. After Luo Fan came here, he casually threw the three-dimensional talisman ball in his hand. The countless three-dimensional talismans directly constructed an 11-layer, palace-shaped three-dimensional talisman. It fell directly on the ground. This 3D seal took root. After coming into contact with the ground, it completely fused with the ground. It looked like a palace had grown out of the Qilin Cliff. Seeing this, Luo Fan suddenly had an idea. He lifted his hand and brushed the air above the main entrance of the palace. In an instant, three large words that any living being, regardless of whether they were literate or not, would be able to understand the meaning of these words with a single glance. They were Last Days Hall. From the perspective of the Earth's universe, he came from the end of days, although he didn't feel that this was anything to be proud of. Since more and more cultivators would walk the path of transcendence from the whirlpool of time and arrive here, there had to be a name to distinguish his place of residence from other cultivators. Calling it the Last Days Hall was the most appropriate. After the name was fixed, Luo Fan smiled and stepped into the Last Days Hall. Although the Last Days Palace's 3D talisman was 2 levels higher than when he had first constructed it, it looked more ordinary than before. At least, it didn't have the characteristic of absorbing the vitality of the outside world for its own use. In other words, it didn't have the characteristic of absorbing the vitality of the outside world for its own use. The entire Last Days Hall stood there like an ordinary palace. The Cheelan Cliff was very magical. After the Last Days Hall was completely stabilized, the surrounding vegetation grew naturally. In the end, the surroundings of the Last Days Hall were no different from other places. It was as if the Last Days Hall had existed here for hundreds of millions of years, as if it had always been here since ancient times. It looked very mysterious. The Last Days Palace was actually a 3-dimensional talisman with 11 layers. Everything inside it would naturally change according to Luo Fan's will. However, the interior of the palace was not like the ordinary palace. It was not just a palace. With just a thought, Luo Fan moved his mind. The inside of the palace turned into a boundless void. It was a void without any sun, moon, or stars. Then he stood in the middle of the void and raised his hand to touch his surroundings. The void changed several feet away from him. It evolved into the Cheelan Cliff. Then, the Cheelan Cliff quickly shrank. In the blink of an eye, it became smaller than his body. At first glance, it seemed as if he was the Cheelan Cliff, and the Cheelan Cliff was him. The scenery around him also changed at the same time. A boundless sea of clouds appeared in the void, completely covering the entire void. As Luo Fan stood there, it seemed as if he was standing in the sea of clouds. This sea of clouds. It was the sea of clouds outside the Cheelan Cliff. What Luo Fan was doing now was using his own senses, or in other words, the wonderful effect of the 3D seal to reconstruct the scenery of the outside world inside the 3D seal. In other words, he was using the 3D seal to transmit the light and shadow of the outside world. This allowed Luo Fan to perceive all kinds of things in the outside world as if he was there. Above the boundless sea of clouds, there were 10 suns hanging high in the sky. The suns were fiercely hot, emitting endless sun essence and sun fire, bringing endless light and heat to the universe. They brought endless vitality. Luo Fan looked down and saw all kinds of things under the sea of clouds. It was a boundless world, the vastness of the world. Although it was smaller than the universe of the future Earth, it could only be measured in hundreds of millions of light years. The first thing that entered Luo Fan's eyes was a boundless ocean. Above this ocean, there were endless continents. Among these continents, there were even more islands. However, among these countless continents, there were 4 continents that were many times larger than the other islands. In fact, it was impossible to describe their size with specific measurements. If one had to describe them, they could only be described as boundless. They were obviously the 4 continents before the world shattered and became the Earth universe. Just as Luo Fan focused his attention on these 4 continents, 4 names appeared in his mind out of thin air. Dongsheng Divine Continent, Aparagadania Continent, Nanjan Continent, Beilu Continent. These 4 names were directly transmitted to him based on the images of the 4 continents. It was not his imagination, nor was it someone who told him the names of the 4 continents. Instead, it was natural for him to know the names of the 4 continents. The beauty of this was similar to the 3 words Last Days Palace that he had engraved on the entrance of the 11-layered 3-dimensional seal. The words Last Days Palace possessed a similar effect. Any living being, regardless of whether they could read or not, regardless of whether they had intelligence or not, regardless of whether they knew this language or not, so long as they saw these words, they would know that it was Last Day's palace, and they wouldn't have any difficulties in understanding it. Similarly, these four names were the same. One did not need to know the names of these four continents. As long as one saw these four continents, one would naturally know what they were called. One would naturally understand that the Dongsheng Divine Continent, a Paragodania continent, Nanzhan Continent, and Beilu Continent were the names of these four continents. I did not expect the legends to be true. There are actually four continents like these. After being together for hundreds of trillions of years, after experiencing countless reincarnations of eras, the legends on Earth are actually completely consistent with the world before the world was destroyed. There isn't even a single word of error. Nothing is more wonderful than this. Luo Fan couldn't help but secretly sigh. Luo Fan couldn't be more familiar with these four names. In his previous life, when he was still on Earth, as a mortal, he already knew these four names. At that time, he knew these four names from a novel written by a mortal. There were even countless legends that had happened on the four continents. They were vivid and lifelike, making people feel as if they were there. For names that would be fantasized about by novelists billions of years in the future had actually existed billions of years ago. There was not the slightest error. The profoundness of it made him sigh with emotion at the wonders of the world. Perhaps it's because these four continents have such wonders that these four names have been passed down from generation to generation. In the end, not even the reincarnation of the ages can be broken. In the end, Luo Fan could only come up with a somewhat far-fetched explanation as to why these four names would appear in the future. However, no matter how he thought about it, it seemed that only this somewhat far-fetched explanation could make sense. The fact that these four continents could let people know their names as soon as they saw them was obviously not a man-made mystery. In other words, it could not be a mystery added by the creatures after the birth of this world. No saint would be so bored as to refine these four continents with such a wonderful effect. The most likely reason for this mystery was that the Creator who created this world had added it to this world or to these four continents. To him, it was obviously just a matter of a thought. Just like the primordial spirit of Pangu in the primitive world, it was to let all living beings understand who created this world. It was just that the Creator who created this world had done more. And such a mystery was engraved in the world. In other words, these four names should also be engraved in the world. Under such circumstances, whether the world was destroyed or not, no matter how much time had passed, no matter how many reincarnations of the ages, as long as the world existed, these four names should also exist in this world. And in the future, who knew how many trillions of years later, a certain novelist might have done it by chance, or perhaps he had a feeling. Perhaps his thoughts were secretly in line. In short, these four names were taken out of the world, incorporated into the novel, and spread from then on. The more Luo Fan thought about it, the more he felt that this explanation seemed to make sense, of course. This was just his habit of instinctively wanting to explain everything. All kinds of thoughts just flashed through his mind. In the blink of an eye, they were thrown to the back of his mind. No matter how these names were passed down to future generations, in the end, it only made him more familiar with these names. With a thought, Luo Fan began to shift his attention to the four continents. The function of this three-dimensional talisman was limited, or it could be said that Luo Fan's perception ability had its limits. His perception of the four continents and the four continents did not really reach a very precise level. He could only roughly get some general terrain, some wonderful natural scenery in some places, and some auras of some powerful cultivators in some places. Of course, even so, it was already a great benefit for him, allowing him to obtain a great harvest. After a few days, he had a general understanding of the situation before the world was broken, whether it was the situation of the cultivation world or the various things in the human world. I didn't expect it to be so similar to the Dharma ending age. After understanding all kinds of things, Luo Fan could not help but secretly hesitate. The cultivation system of this world, before it was broken into the Earth universe, was surprisingly similar to the Dharma ending age. The mainstream was also the cultivation of the way of Jindan. Of course, because of the wonderful cultivation environment of this world, the cultivators were naturally congenital Jindan, but not acquired Jindan like the later Dharma ending age. Sensing the cultivation system of this heaven and earth, Luo Fan suddenly felt as if the time difference between this heaven and earth and the Dharma ending era, which was unknown how many billions of years had passed, didn't seem to exist at all. The cultivation world was constantly developing and changing. Even if the way of Jindan was the mainstream and orthodox in this Earth universe, there would always be changes in the long years of development. The essence might not change, but the form of expression would certainly change over time. It was like the computer software of later generations. The essence was still the same, but a few years later, compared to a few years ago, there would certainly be great changes, and there might even be no similarities at all. This cultivation system might not change so quickly, but after all, it was unknown how many billions of years it had been. If it developed normally, even if there was only a little change in hundreds of millions of years, it would eventually become unrecognizable. At this moment, Luo Fan found that whether it was the essence or the form of expression, there was no change. This absolutely violated the law of the development of things. How could he not feel unacceptable? After thinking for a while, Luo Fan finally reacted, and a wry smile appeared on his face.